Hey guys, tonight we're heading into the heart of ancient Cambodia, into a time where stone temples rise out of the jungle mist like forgotten dreams, where gods walked among mortals, and where something tiny and annoying may have helped unravel one of the world's grandest empires. You'll hear the slow, steady drum of water dripping from temple roofs, the rustle of wind through dense fig trees, and just under that, a high-pitched hum. Yep, mosquitoes, and honestly, you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop your location and local time in the comments, because I love seeing where and when you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through damp underbrush, careful not to slip on the wet stones that line what might have once been a grand ceremonial road. Now, roots clutch at everything, vines drape like forgotten laundry, and the air is sticky with the musk of centuries. All around, there's that soft whine again, high, thin, persistent. At first, you try to ignore it. After all, it's just mosquitoes. But then you notice something else. The fog doesn't just sit low over the trees, it crawls. It pools at the feet of crumbling temple statues, hulking stone faces with blank eyes and faint smiles. The humidity makes your clothes cling to your skin, and your breath feels thick in your lungs. This place is beautiful, yes, but it also hums with unease. You finally reach the base of a staircase carved right into a hillside. The stones are slick with lichen, some broken, others still bearing faint carvings. Serpents, lotus blooms, elephants mid-march. You hesitate. That sound, the wings again, is louder here. Welcome to Angkor, or what's left of it. In its prime, this empire was the crown jewel of Southeast Asia. Centered around Angkor Wat and later Angkor Thom, the Khmer Empire wasn't just big, it was monumental. Think 900-year-old megastructures, hydraulic engineering that would make Roman architects weep, and a spiritual blend of Hinduism and Buddhism that left its fingerprints on every pillar, lintel, and shrine. But something happened. Something slow, almost sneaky. This empire, with all its grandeur, started to fade. And while wars, droughts, and invasions may have cracked its foundation, some historians believe that mosquitoes and the diseases they carried were part of what finally brought it down. Of course, you're probably thinking, how could bugs take down an empire? But remember, this wasn't just a few annoying bites while hiking. We're talking full-blown, empire-scale transmission of malaria and dengue fever in a place that basically invented swamps for irrigation. The Khmer might have mastered stone, but they never truly tamed water. As you climb the staircase, you pause at the top. Before you, the temple emerges from the mist. It's not the postcard-perfect Angkor Wat that gets all the love, but something older, quieter. A lesser-known shrine, barely reclaimed from the jungle. Stone lions guard the threshold, their paws cracked but firm, their faces partly eroded into snarls. Here, they say, is where one of the last kings of the empire hid during his final days, drifting in and out of fever, swatting at invisible threats, mumbling about wings and wet air. It's easy to romanticize the past, to imagine all fallen civilizations as doomed by dramatic battles or volcanic eruptions. But sometimes, it's just too much standing water and not enough citronella. You walk inside, where the air changes cooler but somehow heavier. The temple walls are covered in bas-reliefs, entire stories etched into sandstone, armies on elephant back, celestial dancers, kings blessing the rice harvest. And nestled between them, carvings of flies, small ones, dozens of them. Coincidence? Maybe or maybe not. There's a little-known inscription, tucked into the eastern gate of Ta Prohm Temple. Yes, the Tomb Raider one, vines and all, that lists offerings made during an illness season. Among the coconut milk, jasmine, and smoked fish, one item appears again and again, citron bundles. A natural mosquito repellent, Maybe not the strongest evidence, but it hints that people were very aware of biting sickness long before microscopes. And then there's the swamp. Much of Angkor was surrounded by artificial moats, barrays, giant reservoirs, and canals, a brilliant hydraulic system meant to harness the monsoon, irrigate fields, and impress gods. It worked until it didn't. During prolonged droughts or maintenance failures, those same features became stagnant breeding grounds, a literal empire of puddles. Historians still argue whether this shift in water management was a desperate adaptation or an overlooked mistake. Some think it allowed a mosquito population explosion, quietly infecting laborers, officials, and even royalty. You picture a chain reaction of slow fevers, missed rituals, miscalculated wars. Not a single death blow, just a steady unraveling. You step deeper into the shrine and catch sight of something odd. A faint, reddish smear on the wall. Not paint. Not blood either. It's something herbal, still faintly fragrant. Maybe a smear of paste used in ancient healing rituals. The smell reminds you of crushed lemongrass and smoke. Mosquito repellent. A light joke dances through your mind. Imagine the royal physician announcing, "Great king, your fever stems not from divine punishment, but from swamp bugs. I prescribe 6 cloves of garlic and maybe don't nap near standing water." Somehow, you doubt that went over well. You sit on a stone bench in the inner sanctum. Around you, statues of guardian spirits loom in silence. One has lost its head. Another seems to smirk. The air is still now. No buzz, no hum. But then you spot it. Just one. A tiny, determined mosquito landing softly on your arm like it owns the place. You swat too slow. The Empire's smallest executioner still at work. The truth is, no single theory can fully explain why the Khmer Empire fell. It was likely a perfect storm. Internal power struggles, environmental stress, failed infrastructure, and yes, waves of disease. But sometimes it's the most mundane detail, like a bite on your ankle, that opens the door to myth. And so, the story begins here, in fog and buzzing wings, where stone faces watch you swat at the air and wonder if the past really is dead, or just feasting elsewhere. You linger a while longer beneath the arching stone ribs of the temple, letting your eyes adjust to the dim. Outside, the light shifts as the mist begins to burn off, just enough to silhouette the giant stone faces of Bayon in the distance. Dozens of them, calm, closed-lipped, as if mid-thought. From here, they look almost like they're watching you. Each face is a mystery. Historians still argue whether they represent King Jayavarman VII himself or the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara, compassion incarnate. Maybe they were both, maybe neither. But one thing's clear, something about them feels hollow. Not physically, of course. The sandstone blocks are immense, their weight pressing centuries into the earth. But there's a kind of emptiness in their gaze. They're peaceful, yes, but in that unnerving way you sometimes see in statues built for gods that forgot their names. You step through a low corridor toward Bayon's heart. The ground is uneven, the stones slick beneath your feet. Roots curl into the gaps like the jungle trying to pull it back. Every so often, you hear the faint buzz again, as if the air itself remembers. There's a carving here tucked just above eye level. You squint to make it out, a battle scene. Swords, shields, warriors in motion, but not the kind of motion that wins empires. One soldier lies collapsed, limbs limp with lines radiating from his body. Not arrows, not magic, just lines. Some believe this panel shows a man in the grip of fever. Others say it's divine punishment for cowardice. And a few insist it's simply bad preservation. But once you notice those lines, they ripple through your mind like phantom bites. Was he sick? Dying? Left behind? You sit again, tracing the air. The thought that keeps crawling up your spine is this: what if the enemy wasn't always visible? What if the Empire's greatest threat was too small to carve on its own? Jayavarman VII, The king behind many of these temples wasn't one to shrink from threats. He built hospitals across the kingdom, over 100 of them, in fact. For a 12th century monarch, that's excessive, maybe, or just really concerned public health policy. Modern archaeologists found inscriptions listing remedies distributed at these hospitals, alongside more spiritual offerings, incense, mantras, sacred water. There were herbs known today to repel mosquitoes: citronella, turmeric, neem. Coincidence? Or an early vector control program in disguise? Some of the hospitals even had basins for bathing. Ritual cleansing, sure, but also a potential way to flush larvae from the skin. Or maybe they were just washing off sweat and trying to cool fevers the gods couldn't explain. Your gaze drifts up. The ceiling has collapsed in places, exposing open sky. Through the hole, you can see the head of one of those stone faces peeking through. Again, watching, not judging, just there. There's a fringe theory. Fringe, but fun. That suggests J. of Armin's building spree was actually a reaction to a mosquito-borne crisis. Not just civic pride or divine ego, but an urgent, nationwide public health campaign disguised as religious devotion. A way to manage an empire slowly falling sick. Of course, that's not in textbooks. But as you scratch a bite on your neck, it doesn't seem too outlandish. You step outside and make your way through the surrounding ruins. Every direction reveals a new face, new carving, a new whisper from the stone. There's an odd kind of peace in it until you notice the hum again. Closer this time. There's a joke in here somewhere about ancient plagues and modern tourists. Imagine an emperor dressed in silk and gold, pacing his hall while muttering, "It's the mosquitoes. It's always been the mosquitoes." Cut to you, swatting at your calf, nodding sympathetically. You wander further toward a clearing where some of the stone blocks have toppled into soft grass. Here, centuries ago, royal processions may have marched, priests waving incense, dancers spinning, elephants draped in red and gold. Now it's just you, a dragonfly, and, yes, the buzz again. But something catches your eye. A stone pedestal, moss-covered and cracked in the middle. Its surface bears faded carvings, not words but patterns. Swirls, circles, dots. Some say these were astrological. Others say they mapped stars or spirit roots. A few speculative types whisper that it's a mosquito map. That priests once tracked outbreaks not with numbers, but with temple rhythms, sacred signs, and a particularly aggressive buzzing heard only on moonless nights. Sure, that's probably a reach, but so is the idea that a jungle empire could fall quietly, slowly, from a swarm of bugs. You kneel by the pedestal, brushing away dirt and broken leaf matter. One symbol stands out, a crescent moon over waves. It repeats several times. Is it simply seasonal, wet season warnings, or some kind of fever tide? The story of Angkor is layered like the temple walls. Grand intention laid over flawed execution, mystical belief shrouding basic biology. And somewhere in between, tiny wings biting in the dark. There's a half-forgotten Khmer legend, passed down in rural villages, about the Hollow Kings. Rulers said to be filled with wind and fever instead of blood and strength. These kings drifted through the palace at dusk, speaking to no one, clutching incense burners to hide their shivers. According to the tale, they slept on raised platforms covered in citron leaves, and still, the biting found them. Some say the mosquitoes were punishment for hubris. Others, that they were messengers of the gods, thinning the court for sins never spoken aloud. You lean against a tree, its roots splitting stone, and look toward the faces again. They're still smiling faintly, but now you wonder if it's pity. A rustle behind you, then silence. You hold your breath. There's that high-pitched note again, too fast, too sharp for your ears to follow. Not a single insect, but many, maybe hundreds. You don't run, you just smile. It's fitting, isn't it? standing in the shell of a fallen empire, swatting at the same problem they never solved. And as the sound rises around you, you can almost hear a whisper buried inside it. They never left. They're still feeding. You don't remember falling asleep. But now, in that hazy in-between where dreams mix with memory, you're wading through waist-high reeds in a swamp that shouldn't be here. The air is wet, too wet. You swat at your neck. Again and again. The buzzing returns, not just around your ears, but deep in your thoughts, like a warning whispered through a cracked speaker. You're in the jungle beyond Angkor Thom now. The temples are gone. The carved stone faces have been replaced by trees twisted like frozen thunderclaps. Their roots arch above the earth like ribs of giants long buried. The deeper you go, the louder the hum becomes until it settles into a strange rhythm, like chanting or wings. This, they say, is where the spirits of the wetlands roam. They're not malicious exactly, just clingy. Swamp spirits are sticky. They hang from your ankles when you walk. They slip into your lungs when you breathe too deep. And of course they bite, not to kill, just to remind you they're still here. You stumble across a shrine half swallowed by mud. A single statue rises above the muck, its surface green with moss and pockmarked as if it had once lived through a plague of pebbles or insects. A lotus sits in its outstretched hand, but the flower is wilted, its petals drooping like melted wax. You kneel beside it, not because of reverence, but because you're suddenly lightheaded. You've been here too long. You know this place, though you shouldn't. You've read about it, maybe, heard it mentioned in stories villagers whisper when they think the air isn't listening. This is the Forest of the Buzzing Dead. Okay, dramatic name. But remember, ancient legends had a flair for the theatrical. And this stretch of marshland has long been believed to harbor the spirits of those lost to fevers. Not war, not starvation, just fevers. Hot, bone-deep, delirium-feeding fevers. There's a peculiar record from a 13th century Chinese envoy named Zhou Dogwen, who visited Angkor and wrote about local customs. While historians love to quote him on floating houses and odd food habits, yes, people did eat crickets. One passage often gets glossed over. He describes certain areas so thick with fog that even the monkeys avoid them, where those who sleep their wake with blooded arms and hollow eyes. Hollow eyes, like the Hollow Kings, like you might get if you wake up just a little too late. You move again, brushing past tall grasses that feel like paper strips. The air changes temperature, noticeably warmer now. Another 10 steps and you reach a wide pool. It doesn't ripple, doesn't reflect, it just exists. Stagnant like memory, and floating on its surface, tiny white blossoms. You blink, then realize they're not blossoms, they're wings. Thousands of dead mosquitoes, motionless on the surface, as if waiting for something. Some ritual, or someone foolish enough to wade in. A frog croaks from the far edge, then another, and another. The sound builds into a croaky chorus, almost like laughter. And that's when you remember the old myth about the mosquito queen. Oh yes, the Khmer had one. A minor deity, mostly forgotten, tied to the wet season. She was a goddess of warning, not wrath. Her wings were so large they blocked the moonlight. Her bites didn't draw blood, but memories. She fed on thoughts, on secrets, on the whispers kings told only themselves. When too many truths built up in a city, she would descend, one wing beat at a time, and cleanse the capital. There are no temples to her, no official carvings, just patterns hidden on rice pots, stories woven into silk, and bedtime tales designed to scare children into sleeping under mosquito nets. But you've seen something close. Back at Angkor, remember that carving with the warrior surrounded by radiating lines? Some think that's not fever at all, but the mosquito queen's mark, a blessing, or a curse. You touch your arm again. Another bite, you sigh. It's never just one, is it? And here's the curious thing. The Khmer Empire didn't fall all at once. It shifted, decayed, moved. The population slowly migrated southeast away from Angkor toward what is now Phnom Penh. Why? Some say it was trade, others conflict. But a growing number of scholars are quietly entertaining a stranger possibility. What if the land became unlivable? Not from drought, not from flood, but from disease, transmitted by creatures too small to fight and too fast to flee. Imagine trying to govern from a palace surrounded by reservoirs teeming with larvae. Imagine your priests falling sick during ceremonies, your dancers collapsing mid-performance, your own children refusing to leave the sleeping chambers because the biting gods waited in the hallways. It's not hard to see how myth and reality blur. The jungle seems to part ahead of you, another ruin, this one low to the ground, almost hidden. A circular platform with stone pillars barely standing. A ring of crushed shells encircles it, odd for an inland site. Some believe this was a healing space. Others say it was used to summon rain. And one theory, it was a fever ward. Not for the sick, but for the nearly dead. Those burning with illness would be brought here and left for a night. If they woke, they were purified. If they didn't, well, then the queen had taken what she needed. There's no plaque, no guidebook entry, just stones, moss, and the endless buzz. You sit at the platform's edge, legs dangling over the earth. And something clicks. You've walked in circles. These ruins, these carvings, they're connected. Not just by roads or rivers, but by fever, by bite, by wing. The Khmer were not oblivious to this. Their gods had many forms, some benevolent, some terrifying, and some, like the mosquito queen, were simply honest. They reminded you that even the grandest temple can fall to the smallest itch. And maybe, just maybe, they were right. The frogs fall silent. The buzz returns. And in the still water, the wings start to move. Your feet are heavy now, not from exhaustion, but from that quiet weight of dread that settles in after you've seen too much, and yet know the story has barely begun. You leave the water's edge behind, the dead wings bobbing silently as you go. But even as you push through the underbrush, you feel like something clinging to you. A presence or a memory, maybe both. The path winds upward. Gradually, the swamp gives way to drier land, though the air stays thick enough to chew. There's a rise in the jungle ahead, a stony ridge laced with stair-like stones. You scramble up, panting a little, and at the top you find what you weren't expecting: clear sky. Not wide, just a pocket. A clearing surrounded by tall sugar palms and fan-leaf trees. In the center stands a small shrine, barely more than a stone hut, really, with a narrow spire poking up like a single tooth from a sunken jaw. Here, they say, lived the king who thought himself divine. Jayavarman VIII, one of the last rulers before the real unraveling began. Not the builder like his predecessors, but a man obsessed with purification, control, and appearances. His rule was a reversal. He ordered Buddhist imagery defaced, temples rededicated to Hindu gods, statues smashed. But not out of rage or theological fervor, at least not entirely. Some think he was afraid. And fear, as you know, makes excellent myth. You step into the cool dark of the shrine and pause. The walls are covered with scratches. No, not inscriptions. Actual scratches. Hundreds of them. Fingernail marks, maybe, or tools. But always in the same strange looping pattern, like someone was trying to draw wings with nothing but time and desperation. That's when you spot it. Near the rear wall, there's a faded mural half obscured by mildew. You lean in. A man sits cross-legged, arms limp at his sides, his crown tilted awkwardly. Around him, insects, hundreds. They swarm across his body like a blanket, his eyes wide, his mouth open in a silent scream. But here, the kicker, he's smiling. It's not a joyful smile. It's resigned, peaceful, like he's finally accepted something the rest of the world hasn't. The legend goes like this. The king, believing himself untouchable, slept beneath a sacred canopy of lotus and sandalwood. He was guarded by priests, surrounded by incense, wrapped in spells. But still, night after night, the buzzing came. He grew paranoid, accused courtiers of treason, physicians of poisoning, even blamed the architecture for channeling spirits into his chamber. He had entire wings of the palace torn down and rebuilt at new angles, but nothing stopped the fevers. The more he resisted, the sicker he became. Eventually, he gave up, declared himself not divine, but cursed. He ordered his sacred canopy burned and had himself sealed into this shrine, asking only for still water, silence, and darkness. Historians still argue whether this is myth, madness, or metaphor, but they all agree on one point. After Jayavarman VIII, things were never quite the same. You step outside again, letting the sunlight sting your eyes. The air hums louder up here. The clearing is perfectly still, yet the sound persists. A subtle drone, like the jungle breathing through its teeth. You remember how old empires often connected royalty to divinity. Pharaohs were gods. Chinese emperors claimed the mandate of heaven. The Khmer kings, they danced between Vishnu and Buddha, god kings one day, fevered men the next. And now, you wonder, how divine can a king be if even he can't stop a mosquito? That quiet buzz seems to answer for you. Not very. Down the path, you spot another stone slab, flat and smooth. On its surface is a ring of tiny dots pressed like punctures. Could be decorative. Could be a map. Could just be time chewing away at the surface. But something about it feels intentional. There's another record, a temple inscription from the 1200s that describes a rot of the air affecting the sacred groves. It mentions symptoms, burning skin, the quivering eye, a restless spirit in the chest. Today, we'd call that a high fever and respiratory symptoms. Back then, they called it a punishment for forgetting the gods. The same text ends with a strange line. Even the lotus recoiled. A poetic turn of phrase, or maybe a sign that even the kingdom's sacred symbols couldn't withstand the sickness. You sit on the slab, wondering if it was once used for offerings, or burials, or healing. The stone is cool against your skin, a rare relief in this stifling heat. A dragonfly darts past your face, bigger than any you've seen, almost arrogant in its flight. And for a moment, you wish it was mosquitoes that had gone extinct instead. But no, these tiny bloodsuckers are eternal, undefeated. They were here before the empire. They'll be here long after. You run a hand across your arm. Another welt, you sigh. The kings had jewels. You've got antihistamines. And still, it itches. But this story isn't just about bugs, of course. It's about how civilizations crack, not in fire and fury, but in the soft erosion of belief. When gods get quiet, when kings stop building, when people, faced with the bite and the fever, start leaving. You stand, brushing dirt from your clothes. The clearing feels smaller now, as if the jungle has crept in closer while you weren't looking. The shrine behind you looms just slightly taller. The buzzing grows more insistent. Time to move. Because you remember now, this isn't a history lesson. It's a myth, a warning, a bedtime tale with just enough truth to keep you scratching long after the lights go out. You follow a narrow trail downhill, feet sinking slightly into the damp soil. The mist is gone now, but the air is no clearer. It just swirls a little faster, like it's trying to remember something. Ahead lies a curious structure. 4 short pillars arranged in a square, surrounding a flat stone platform darkened by time and exposure. This is not a temple, not a shrine. It's older than those. Locals call it the Leech Healer's Table. You're not sure what you expected. Maybe something mystical, mysterious. But no, it's exactly what it sounds like. The legend goes that there once lived a healer, a woman with skin like aged sandalwood, eyes like candle smoke, and a voice soft as falling rain. She wasn't ordained, wasn't royalty. But when the court physicians failed, nobles and servants alike came whispering to her door. Her tools were unusual. Leeches first and foremost, not the little ones either, big ones. Glossy and black, raised in jars filled with fermented rice water and betel leaves. To you, this might sound grotesque, but in her time, that was precision medicine. You crouch beside the platform and imagine it. A young prince sprawled here, pale and sweating. Mosquito bites blooming across his chest. Fever high enough to make stone faces swirl and shift. The leech woman would arrive in silence, her robes soaked in citron oil, leeches coiling in bamboo flasks at her hip. With deft fingers, she'd apply them to pulse points, wrists, ankles, temples. They say the leeches never misjudged. They knew who was savable and who was not. Modern historians try to parse the truth. Leeches were, in fact, used throughout Southeast Asia, not just to remove bad blood, but to reduce swelling, soothe skin infections, and even draw out poisons. Whether they worked, well, that's still up for debate. But in the legend, the leech healer never failed, unless the mosquitoes had already marked their victory. You move around the platform and notice something scratched into the stone, almost hidden under lichen. Circles, interconnected like ripples in a pond, or if you're feeling a little paranoid, like the rings left behind by bites. Or maybe the leeches were trying to write something. There's another part of the story. When the empire began to decline, the royal court invited the healer to stay full-time at Angkor Thom. They built her a residence near the edge of the Baray, the vast reservoir used to regulate the city's water supply. She accepted, on one condition. No walls. Her home would be open on all sides. She claimed that sickness grew in corners, festered in trapped air. She needed wind, flow, space for the spirits to pass through, and for the mosquitoes, perhaps, to pass on. Of course, that kind of design didn't win many fans among the architects, or the royals, but she persisted. They say she worked tirelessly during one particularly brutal season, treating priests, dancers, even the king's cousin, who arrived convulsing, muttering in Sanskrit, and claiming to see dragons made of vapor and winged knives. She saved him, but not herself. One night she fell asleep on her own table, leeches still clinging to her forearms. By morning she was cold. No wounds, no signs, just a faint smile, like she knew. And after that, things got worse. The Baray overflowed. The rains came harder. The court physicians started burning their own texts. And the buzzing, always the buzzing, grew louder than temple bells. You sit beside the table now, the forest pressing in. A bird calls once, twice, then falls silent. Even the insects pause as if remembering her. There's a strange comfort in the idea that healing once came from someone outside the hierarchy. That not every problem was met with swords or stone, but with herbal oils, soft hands, and quiet conviction. One of her known remedies survives, actually. Written on a palm leaf scroll and copied by monks long after her death. It was called the Steam of the Three Winds, a mix of lemongrass, ginger, and crushed betel heated over coals and inhaled until the fever broke, or the patient did. You wish you had some right now. A twig snaps nearby, just a monkey probably, but the sound echoes like footsteps in a library. You look around, suddenly alert. The table feels colder now. The trees lean in. The leeches, you imagine, are long gone, but their patient work left a mark, not just in skin, but in memory. Historians still argue whether she was real, whether her name, long lost to time, was ever recorded in the palace archives. Some say she was merely an amalgam of midwives and herbalists across the region. Others insist she was the kingdom's last real physician before desperation turned to rituals. But maybe, you think, that's what myth is for, to hold the space between what we know and what we need to believe. A breeze moves through the clearing. Light scatters through the canopy like coins tossed into a sacred pool. And for a moment, the table almost gleams, just enough for you to imagine someone lying on it again. Eyes closed, breath slowing, a prayer whispered into the crown of their head. If the bite takes you, let it take only your fever. And just like that, the buzz returns. Gentle, persistent, patient. You rise, stretching your legs. It's time to move again. Because while stories may rest, they never sleep for long. You walk until your feet find stone again. Not polished floors, but a causeway, worn and uneven, lined with toppled balustrades shaped like nagas, those legendary seven-headed serpents that once guarded holy paths. Some have been swallowed by vines, others sit half-sunk in mud. You step carefully, trying not to trip where centuries have cracked the surface. Ahead, a spire rises from behind the trees, slender, quiet, reflective. Neak-Peen. Of all Angkor's temples, this one feels different. There are no grand staircases or leering stone faces here. Just a square pool with a small circular island at the center, and in the middle of that, a modest shrine. But the magic, they say, was never in the architecture. It was in the water. This was a temple of healing, a hydro-ritual complex if you want to impress at parties. 4 small pools surround the main one, each fed by a different channel, representing earth, wind, fire, and water. Bathing here wasn't just spiritual, it was medicinal. You approach the edge. The water now is shallow, dark, and still. Its surface broken by floating leaves and, mosquitoes. A quiet swarm dances above it, reflecting the sky like living static. Imagine this place during the Empire's height. Monks chanting, water flowing, the air thick with herbal smoke. Devotees stepping into the sacred pools one at a time. The priests believed that illness was imbalance of the elements, of the spirit, of the kingdom itself. Rebalance the body, and you could repel any sickness, even the ones that came on wings. A fringe theory, and of course, there's always one, suggests Neak-Peen was more than symbolic. That it was designed to flush and circulate water in a way that discouraged mosquito breeding. An early form of vector control wrapped in myth and ritual. That would have worked if the system hadn't eventually clogged. Historians still debate when the canals first stopped flowing. Some argue it was during a particularly harsh drought when water dried up across the Angkor basin. Others blame sediment, vegetation overgrowth, or royal neglect. But once the water stopped moving, everything changed. You circle the main pool, noticing the stone outlets shaped like animal heads, horse, lion, elephant, and human. Each spout once channeled water from the central basin into the directional pools. If you were sick in the head, you bathed in the east. Heart trouble, west. Liver problems, south. And fevers, always the north. There's something poetic about that, don't you think? A 1,000-year-old spa assigning your ailments to the compass, as if geography itself could heal you. You find a moss-covered bench and sit. The mosquito buzz is constant now, not aggressive, just ambient, like temple bells at a distance. White noise for the cursed. There's a carving on the edge of the bench. A horse, strange, considering horses weren't especially sacred in Khmer mythology. But here, it matters, because this isn't any horse. This is Balaha. According to legend, Balaha was an avatar of the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara, the same figure many believe inspired the faces of Bayon. He could take the form of a great winged horse to rescue travelers from danger, especially women kidnapped by demons. But there's a darker twist to the Neak-Peen version. In some temple tales, Balaha doesn't fly. He wades through the swamp, slowly, patiently, his wings useless against the weight of water and biting air. Some say he came not to rescue, but to suffer alongside. You lean back, letting the sun warm your face. The silence here is deceptive. It pretends to be peace, but it hides something. You remember a passage from an old monk's diary, found in a stone jar near this very pool. He wrote of a night when the stars flickered like fireflies and the waters of Neak Peen turned black with insects. He called it the night of biting wind. The temple attendants burned bundles of lemongrass. They prayed. They chanted mantras until their throats went raw. And still, the buzzing filled every chamber. Some claimed they saw the water boil, not with heat, but with wings. The next day, the king's youngest son fell ill. By dusk, he could no longer walk. By morning, he was gone. The priest ended his entry with a line both heartbreaking and beautiful. We poured water over stone, but the stone did not weep. You rise from the bench, walk to the edge. You want to believe this place still holds healing. That something deeper lingers in the moss and silt, but the water just stares back at you. Another joke, maybe. That an empire's most sacred medical complex now breeds the very creatures it once tried to cleanse. You chuckle softly and then stop, because the buzz is closer now. You glance to your left and see a small statue, barely taller than your knee, carved with a simple figure. Its arms are outstretched, its face erased by time, but you swear just for a moment that it looks like it's scratching. You turn away. As you leave the temple, the path narrows again. Behind you, the pools sit still like waiting eyes. And in your wake, the hum begins to swell. Not angry, not joyful, just eternal. You're beginning to understand. The mosquitoes were never just pests. They were reminders. Every bite a whispered warning. Every welt a scar from history. And Neak Peen. It's not a ruin. It's a memory looped in water and wings. The question now is, what happens when we forget? The path from Neak Peen winds gently downward, guiding you into rice fields that stretch across the lowland like shallow, glistening mirrors. The light catches in the flooded terraces, reflecting strips of sky between tufts of young green stalks. It's beautiful, peaceful, even until the hum returns. Here in the open fields, the sound is different. Less like a whisper and more like a warning. You pause at the edge of the paddy and feel the soft squelch of mud through your sandals. Welcome to the fields. Welcome to the hum. This land once fed thousands, maybe millions. The Khmer Empire's lifeblood wasn't gold or war, but rice. The system they created to grow and harvest it was astonishing. Dikes, canals, seasonal reservoirs, all fine-tuned to ride the rhythms of monsoon and dry. It was engineering disguised as devotion. And yet, every blessing brings its shadow. Standing water, everywhere. You wade carefully along the ridge between paddies. A farmer's hat hangs on a bamboo pole ahead, long abandoned, weather-warped, woven straw now soft as fungus. You glance around, half expecting someone to pop up between the rows, waving hello. But no one does. The fields are empty, just the rice, the water, and the buzz. There's a local story about these fields, one that never made it into scholarly journals. It's said that certain rice paddies hum at night. Not from frogs, not from wind, from wings. People say you can hear the difference. A normal buzz is sharp, frantic, unpredictable. But the cursed paddies hum in harmony, low, steady, as if the field itself is singing. No birds go near them. Even the buffalo refuse to drink from the ditches beside them. One elder in a nearby village once claimed the hum was the voice of the drowned. Because you see, during the height of the empire, slaves and prisoners were often sent to the fields as punishment. Not just to labor, but to live. Small huts, no mosquito nets, no protection. They'd work barefoot in ankle-deep water, covered in bites by noon, burning with fever by nightfall. Many never left. And so, the myth says, their spirits remained. Not angry, just itchy. You stop at one corner where a small shrine juts up from the edge of the canal. It's just a stone slab with a few dried flowers scattered at its base. But carved into its surface is a simple glyph. a human hand with what looks like 5 tiny insect wings emerging from the wrist. A fringe interpretation suggests this was an old farmer's way of marking bite season, but others say it was a warning, a sign that here, in this exact patch, the sickness took hold. There's another oddity you may not have heard. Ancient Khmer field rituals sometimes included what's called the humming bowl. It was a large bronze dish floated on the surface of an irrigation pool during festivals. People would gather around it, touch its rim, and begin to hum in unison. The vibrations were believed to drive off evil spirits, or in some versions, to confuse the mosquito swarm. Historians still argue whether the ritual was symbolic, therapeutic, or just a communal excuse to get weird around water. But one monk's travelogue mentions that the bowl sang loudest when death was near, and that's enough to keep your skin crawling. You move on, further along the irrigation path, and spot something curious up ahead. A scarecrow. Sort of. It's shaped like a man, sure, but not one meant to scare off birds. No, this one's different. Its limbs are outstretched, tied to thin bamboo poles. Around its waist is a skirt made of dried lotus leaves. Its face is covered by a palm leaf mask painted red. Beneath it, a shallow bowl of stagnant water. Inside the bowl, mosquito larvae, dozens of them. Some villagers still practice this rite. It's not to ward off pests, it's to feed them. The belief is simple. If you make an offering, the insects will spare you. The effigy stands in your place, draws their hunger. A bite for a bite. Balance. You stand there staring at the larvae wriggling in the water. You should feel disgusted. But strangely, you just feel tired. You glance at your arm. Another welt, that makes, 8, 9? You scratch despite yourself. It doesn't help. Back in the late Empire, royal field surveyors were often sent to test new canals and report back on productivity. Some of their journals survive in fragments: water-stained palm leaf scrolls, cracked lacquer covers, faded ink. One entry ends with a scribbled line that gives you pause. The rice grows well, but the men die humming. Maybe poetic, maybe literal. You sit on the edge of a rock and take in the stillness. This place fed empires, and it also bled them. The tragedy of Angkor wasn't collapse. It was attrition. It was working yourself into the mud, day after day, until the fever caught you in the chest and didn't let go. It was biting something you couldn't see, trying to cure it with chance and steam, and watching it return each wet season like clockwork. You rise, brush mud from your hands, and look back once more at the scarecrow. For a moment, it looks too real. Its mask seems to twitch. But no, just the wind, just a trick of the light. Still, you don't walk directly past it. You go around. Because this isn't just a story anymore. You're in it, and you'd rather not test the patience of the buzzing dead. The fields fall away behind you, replaced by a winding path of packed red dirt and rising jungle. You find yourself on a trail that feels older than the empire itself, so ancient that even the roots seem to part for it out of habit. This, according to local legend and half-buried markers, was once an elephant path. Not the kind used for parades or royal festivals. No, this was a trade artery, a lifeline between Angkor and distant provinces. Ceremonial processions may have crossed it, but mostly it carried salt, spices, iron, and less glamorously, buckets of leeches. You walk now in the shadow of that forgotten commerce, and with every step, the buzzing returns. Because here, where jungle meets road, the mosquitoes thrive. And why wouldn't they? The shade is thick, the air is damp, and the only thing moving faster than you are the parasites that tag along. You scratch again, first your ankle, then your forearm. It's becoming a habit, or maybe a symptom. A story passed between old guides in this region says that elephants, noble beasts as they were, would sometimes stop mid-trek. Refuse to move. Just freeze. No matter how much their mahouts cajoled or begged, they'd stand still, ears twitching, eyes wide. The guides would dismount, circle the animal, and usually find the same thing. A tiny swarm of mosquitoes clustered just beneath one ear, buzzing furiously. The elephant could feel the sickness coming. The Khmer called this prale sapank, roughly, the soft death. Not dramatic, not violent, just slow weakening. A fade-out, parasites, fever, blood loss, and then silence. You pass a cracked marker stone, moss-eaten and half-toppled. It bears no inscription, just a faint image, an elephant slumped. Beneath it, a curl of smoke and 3 small dots. Some interpret the dots as incense, others as stars, but you suspect they represent something else, the number of bites before the beast fell. The joke here, of course, writes itself. Massive creatures, tall as trees, armored with hide thick as wood, and still they couldn't handle a mosquito. Makes you feel a little better about your own itchy shins. But there's something deeper here. Because this road didn't just carry goods, it carried people. Families migrating between villages, young warriors sent to the capital, dancers called to royal courts, and with them parasites, malaria, dengue, chikungunya, all moving silently, invisibly, one host at a time. You stop for a drink, pulling a bottle from your pack. The moment you uncap it, 3 mosquitoes land on your wrist. You slap one, miss 2. You sigh. Hydration isn't the problem. There's a curious fringe theory, mentioned in a little-known paper published by a Southeast Asian epidemiologist, that the Khmer highways acted as sickness superspreaders. The layout, so brilliant for logistics, unintentionally allowed mosquito-borne illnesses to move further and faster than they ever had before. Combined with the increased population density of Angkor, the empire may have, ironically, designed the perfect ecosystem for its own invisible predator. Historians still argue whether this theory holds up. There's no firm archaeological proof of mosquito migration patterns. But then again, mosquitoes don't leave skeletons, just symptoms. The jungle around you changes. Less canopy now, more vines. The path narrows into what looks like a dry creek bed. The air grows cooler, more stagnant. You walk slower here, not just out of caution, but because the weight of history presses in. You step over a fallen tree and find a flat stone etched with crude lines. Not formal script, just slashes and circles, possibly a map, possibly graffiti. But one section catches your eye, a dot with dozens of short lines radiating from it. You trace it with your finger. It looks like the sun, or a flower, or a mosquito. There's another story, less myth, more strange fact, about a Khmer village that vanished entirely. Not burned, not destroyed, just gone. It was positioned near a swamp along this very route. One year, after a particularly bad rainy season, villagers reported biting clouds. Not just swarms, but actual visual phenomena, dark shapes hovering over the water, pulsing like heartbeats. People fell sick. Animals fled. Entire families began dreaming the same dream, being eaten by wings. Within months, the village was abandoned. Later travelers described the site as unnaturally quiet. No birds, no frogs, just buzzing. And even today, the locals avoid it. You step carefully over a patch of thick mud, your foot slipping just enough to remind you that this jungle isn't impressed by your historical curiosity. It wants to be left alone. And frankly, after all these centuries, maybe it's earned that. A small shrine appears on the edge of the path, partially swallowed by vines. You kneel beside it. It's dedicated to Preco, the sacred bull. Protector, strength, endurance, and yet, its face is missing, weathered off, like it's tired of watching. You offer a quiet thanks anyway. Not for protection, just for the story. Because here's the truth that keeps creeping in. The Khmer Empire didn't fall with a bang. It frayed. It softened. It melted beneath the weight of things too small to name. People moved, roads broke down, fields went untended, and in the silence that followed, the mosquitoes sang louder. You stand, stretch your back. The path continues ahead, its curves lost to the green. Somewhere deeper in the jungle, stone bridges have crumbled. Temples have returned to the roots. And the roads, once carved by elephant feet and royal decree, are now walked only by the wind and you. And always, always the hum. Your legs ache now. The heat presses in like a damp wool blanket, and every breath feels slow, deliberate, a little heavier than before. But the path ahead shifts, flattening out, widening slightly, and as the trees part, you come to a place that doesn't look like a ruin at all. At first, it just looks like a large, dry basin, maybe a drained lake, maybe an overgrown field, but the straight lines betray it. This was built, designed, engineered. You're standing at the edge of what was once one of the greatest hydraulic experiments in pre-modern history. The West Baray. One of Angkor's colossal reservoirs, or barays, this one stretches nearly 5 miles long and over a mile wide. Even now, it holds seasonal water. Back in its prime, it was a miracle of labor, planning, and divine symbolism. Water wasn't just practical, it was sacred. The barays served many purposes. They regulated irrigation, ensured year-round rice cultivation, and reflected temples like cosmic mirrors. They were Angkor's arteries, part engineering marvel, part spiritual infrastructure. But, and here's the twist, they may also have been the empire's downfall. You begin to circle the basin, your boots crunching over patches of dried algae and cracked mud. The breeze picks up here, but it does little to clear the constant, familiar buzz. If anything, it swirls it into something more chaotic. There's a long-standing debate among archaeologists about Angkor's water management system. Was it too ambitious? Did it become too complex to maintain? Or did the very features meant to control water actually contribute to disaster? Historians still argue whether the West Baray was functional during the final years of the empire or merely symbolic, a giant stagnant monument to past glory. Some believe poor maintenance turned these once-flowing systems into vast mosquito hatcheries. Water that once brought life may have started breeding death. You imagine it, entire stretches of the Baray motionless under the midday sun. Shimmering surfaces filled not with sacred lotus, but with larvae, swarms rising at dusk. Field hands collapsing before harvest, priests blessing water while it betrayed them under the surface. There's an old proverb scratched into a piece of sandstone found near this site. When the water forgets to move, the people forget to stay. That line stuck with you. It feels like a riddle, or maybe a resignation. You reach the midpoint of the basin, where remnants of a stone embankment break the earth like the spine of something ancient. Climbing it gives you a better view. The land is sunken here, patterned by old irrigation lines that now serve no one. The wind carries the scent of wet vegetation, sun-baked algae, and something vaguely metallic. At the base of the embankment, a narrow canal once connected the Baray to a surrounding rice field. Today, it's clogged with mud, debris, and a thin trickle of black water. But near the mouth of the canal, something gleams, a fragment of bronze. You pull it from the earth. It's curved, feather-light, possibly part of a ritual bowl or ornament, but carved into its edge are tiny concentric circles. You've seen that pattern before in the stone near Neek Peen in the Leech Healer's table. A quiet signature, a quiet warning. The question nags, did they know? Did the Khmer realize their magnificent hydraulic system, so central to their success, was also harboring the seeds of sickness? Modern tropical disease studies suggest that malaria-carrying mosquitoes flourish in stagnant, shallow water, especially when that water sits undisturbed through heat, shaded in parts, rich in plant matter, which, is a perfect description of a poorly maintained beret. And unlike a battlefield or a flood, mosquito-borne illness doesn't leave monuments. It leaves memories, whispers, itches. You sit on the embankment, feet dangling toward the canal. A bird cries in the distance, but the sky is otherwise still. You try to picture the laborers who carved this basin out of earth, the priests who blessed the first waters, the kings who gazed out from balconies at the shimmering surface, believing it would outlive them all. There's a fringe account in one 14th century Chinese record that mentions the great water trembling with sickness. It's a strange phrase, possibly poetic. Or maybe someone actually saw the larvae wriggling en masse beneath the glassy surface and didn't know how else to describe it. You lean back and close your eyes for a moment. You think about the beret as a metaphor. The idea that what nourishes us can also undo us. That control is an illusion. That even stone can betray you if water turns still. Then you feel it. Bite left forearm. Sharp, fast, familiar. You slap, miss. Another lands near your ear, then another. The buzz intensifies. You don't panic, not really, but you move quickly. Down the embankment, through the reeds, back onto the drier path. Swatting, cursing softly under your breath. There's no swarm, not really, but the sense of it surrounds you. And maybe that's what the Khmer felt, too, in those final years. Not a flood, not a battle, just a slow crescendo of discomfort, illness, and disarray. You look back once at the West Beret. It doesn't glisten now, it looms. An empire built on water, and brought low by what that water chose to carry. As you leave, you notice one final carving on a sunken slab near the edge of the trail, barely visible, but there. A face, not of a king or a god or a serpent, just a neutral, featureless mask. And around it, a halo of tiny wings. The path narrows once more. The sky above is thick with haze, though it hasn't rained in hours. You're deep in the woods now, jungle closing in on both sides. Branches claw the air overhead, vines dangle like tired arms, and the air buzzes, not just with insects, but with tension. This is where they say Jayavarman went mad. Jayavarman VII, Angkor's great builder, conqueror of the Kham, restorer of Khmer pride. The man who commissioned Angkor Thom, Bayon Pre Khan. The king who filled the landscape with compassion-shaped stone, built 102 hospitals, and etched his humility into temple walls. But even god-kings catch fevers. You push through a thicket and reach a clearing where the remnants of a monastery sit half swallowed by earth. Stones have tumbled from what was once a low wall. Trees grow straight through archways. A single bell lies cracked, silent in the underbrush. This was a place of quiet reflection, a retreat. It's said that Jayavarman came here in his final years, not as king, but as a sick man seeking peace. Of course, came might be a generous word. Some say he fled here. By then, his once glorious empire was fraying. The hydraulic system faltered. Trade routes shifted. Enemies stirred. And through it all came the fevers, slow, relentless, unrelenting. Not the spectacular kind that brought men to their knees in hours, but the subtle, wasting kind that turned days into hallucinations. The stories vary. One monk's account describes the king wandering the monastery grounds barefoot, muttering about burning air and whispering winds. Another claims he began sleeping in the outer cloisters, refusing food, scratching at invisible bites. A servant wrote of finding the king in the lotus pond one morning, half submerged, eyes open, still whispering to someone only he could see. Historians still argue whether Jayavarman's decline was due to illness, grief, or politics. But most agree something changed in him after the height of his rule. And the mosquitoes, well, they're not usually included in official narratives. But then again, they wouldn't be, would they? You sit on a stone near the cracked bell and try to imagine the scene. A monarch wrapped in soaked linens, shivering even in tropical heat. A circle of healers, priests, courtiers watching helplessly. Incense thick in the air, and outside, just beyond the carved balustrades, the buzz. Always the buzz. There's an apocryphal tale that Jayavarman believed mosquitoes were spirits. Not in a metaphorical sense, but literally, the souls of the dead returning to feed on the living. Every bite, he said, was a memory clawing its way back into the flesh. He had his bedroom flooded, ordered all stagnant water near the palace drained, burned his own sandals in a fevered ritual, but nothing worked. Finally, he vanished from the court and reappeared here in these woods. His guards followed, his healers too, but the king refused to speak. He sat beneath a bodhi tree and stared into the canopy for days. Some say he waited for the spirits to explain themselves. Others say he hoped they'd finish what they started. You run your hand along the mossy stone. It's cold, slick, strangely soothing. And for a moment, you wonder if you're sitting where he once did. It's easy to turn a king into a ghost, especially when the empire he built began to crumble so slowly, so quietly. Especially when that crumble came with itching skin and cracked lips and a constant, maddening hum. A small statue lies toppled near the bell. You brush away leaves. It's a representation of Avalokiteshvara, the bodhisattva of compassion, the listener of the cries of the world. The face is serene, the lips almost smiling, but one of the eyes has been chipped away, giving it a different expression entirely: weariness. There's a carving on the bell's base, mostly obscured by vines and rust. You crouch to read it. Most of the text is worn to dust, but one fragment remains. When the wind brings wings, close your eyes and remember your name. A prayer, a warning, a lullaby. You sit back and breathe, the trees sway. The buzz returns, not angry, not loud, just there. And maybe that's the hardest part to imagine, what it must have felt like to rule an empire so vast and be brought low by something too small to see. No battle, no enemy banners on the horizon, just the slow erosion of strength, the crawling heat of fever, and the memory of what was. Another story, likely apocryphal, claims that in his final days, Jayavarman summoned all his surviving architects and ordered them to build a temple entirely without water. No moats, no ponds, no reservoirs, a dry temple. They tried, but it collapsed before completion. The earth cracked beneath it, and a spring burst up from the center, flooding the base. The king, upon seeing it, reportedly laughed once and whispered, "Even the gods are bitten." You don't know if that story's true, but it feels true. And in Angkor, that's what matters. You rise, stretching sore legs, and step back onto the overgrown trail. The bell gives a faint metallic creak behind you, as if settling or sighing. And as you leave the ruins behind, you think about the stories we tell when kings fall. We blame enemies. We cite famines, floods, celestial omens. But sometimes, the truth is softer. Sometimes, the king just never stopped scratching. The jungle shifts as you descend from the quiet ruins of Jayavarman's retreat. It thickens, not in greenery, but in mood. The air darkens by degrees, not from clouds, but from some hush in the atmosphere. Even the buzz quiets here, as if something bigger has taken up residence. You keep walking, drawn by instinct now, not trail markers. The trees arch over you like cathedral columns, laced with hanging vines that twitch even when there's no breeze. And then, suddenly, the path opens into a clearing where the grass has grown too tall, the stone too pale, and the light too red. Something happened here. The locals call this place Pralay Kook, the day the sky bled. You wouldn't find it on most maps. It's more of a rumor than a ruin. But the story lingers. One day, the sky turned red, not at sunset, not from rain, but at noon. Blood red, ominous, wrong. They say the clouds thickened over Angkor like ink spreading across rice paper. the sun vanished. The winds picked up, swirling over the temples, and the air filled with that familiar sound, not thunder, not birds, but the collective scream of a million wings. The mosquitoes rose like smoke. You might laugh, sounds like a dramatic exaggeration, right? But there is historical reference, sort of. A 14th century Chinese envoy recorded a sky of fire and a storm of biting clouds over Angkor. No direct mention of insects, but he does note that many in his party fell ill, some so badly they couldn't stand for days. One scribe died. Fever, vomiting, blackened lips. No warfare, just weather and wings. You step into the middle of the clearing, where a fallen lintel lies like a grave marker. Carved along its side is a band of figures, tiny, winged, hunched. Not demons, not gods, just pests. But they surround a central character, a priest or a king slouched on a dais, his robes tangled, his face expressionless. There's a dog lying at his feet. Or is it a jackal? You crouch for a better look. The artist carved each figure with care. There's motion here, a sense of chaos. One version of the legend says that on the day the sky bled, a priest stood at the center of Angkor and declared the age of men to be over. "The insects have won," he said, before stepping into the moat and vanishing. Another version, that the sky itself had opened not as punishment but as revelation. The mosquito, said the high priest, was the final teacher. To itch is to remember, to bleed is to be humble. You look up. The trees surrounding the clearing seem older here, scarred, twisted, watching. The light, too, feels unnatural, dull though it isn't yet dusk. The myths grew more elaborate in later retellings. Some say the sky wasn't just red, it wept. Actual droplets of crimson rain. Not blood exactly, but something thicker than water. A signal, a sickness. The coming of an age where no crown could protect you. There's a story about a dancer, one of the Apsaras trained from childhood to embody the celestial court. She was meant to perform for the king that day. But as she stepped onto the stone stage, her body convulsed. Not from fear or exhaustion, but from fever. Her limbs twisted, her eyes rolled back. They say she danced anyway. Her final performance, a writhing, spasmodic plea to the gods. When she collapsed, the rain began. It's theater, of course, myth, but also not entirely unlike the truth. Mass outbreaks of disease weren't uncommon in ancient cities. When water systems failed, waste accumulated, and population density grew, insects flourished. Modern research has identified cyclical dengue-like illnesses in Southeast Asia dating back centuries. But there are no lab results here, no hospital records, just stories like this, red skies, screaming wings, and collapsed dancers. You reach the far edge of the clearing, where a set of shallow steps leads to nothing. Just stone blocks half buried in grass. You sit on the steps and let your hand rest on the warm stone. Here's something eerie. For all Angkor's grandeur, there are surprisingly few records of mass plagues. No tombs filled with fevered corpses. No carvings of dying crowds. But perhaps that's the point. Maybe it wasn't dramatic enough. Mosquitoes don't build monuments. You think about that priest, whether real or imagined, standing in the red sky declaring defeat. And you wonder, was he wrong? Not in the literal sense, of course. The empire lasted years after that moment, but something shifted, something vital. An empire doesn't fall all at once. It frays. And maybe the first rip was caused not by war or water, but by wings. You lie back on the stone and stare up at the canopy, the green broken by slivers of light. You could fall asleep here, if not for the right on cue. You sit up fast, slapping your shoulder. Just one, always just one. Until there's more. You stand and dust yourself off. Time to move on. As you walk away from the clearing, you glance back once. The lights shifted. The stone is darker, the air denser. And if you didn't know better, you'd swear something moved behind the far tree. But it's gone now, like the empire, like the dancer. like the sky, returning to blue. Until next time. You emerge from the jungle to find yourself at the base of a temple terrace so steep and narrow, it seems to claw the sky rather than reach for it. This is no grand pyramid like Angkor Wat, no symmetrical sanctuary for celestial gods. This temple, long unnamed in popular maps, was once devoted to music, performance, and ritual spectacle. It's also where people came to die mid-step. The stairs are slick with time. You climb slowly, your hands brushing over sun-warmed stone, feeling where centuries of feet have worn paths smooth. At the top, a shallow platform opens like a stage before the jungle, a panoramic view of vines, sky, and memory. This is where the dancers moved. The Apsaras, celestial dancers of Khmer mythology, weren't just performers. They were messengers, embodiments of divine grace, liaisons between mortals and gods. To dance was to bless the king, to petition the heavens, to keep the world in harmony. And during the height of the empire, these dances were everywhere, in courtyards, near sacred pools, before royal feasts. But when the fevers came, they struck hardest here. You walk across the platform, your shadow stretching over faded mosaics depicting swirling limbs and floating scarves. Some of the figures are incomplete, missing heads or arms, but their movement survives in the curve of a wrist, the bend of a knee. One tale haunts this place. They say a troupe of dancers was summoned here to perform during a monsoon evening for a royal ceremony. But the air was thick. The waters nearby had turned still. The mosquitoes came early that season, too early and too many. By the time the performance began, several dancers were already weakened. One collapsed mid-spin, her ankle folding unnaturally. Another fell backward into the arms of a musician. The rest tried to continue, out of duty or fear. They danced until they could no longer stand. One musician later wrote, on a scrap of palm leaf preserved in a temple archive, that the music fought with the wings that night, that the buzzing grew louder than drums. He called it the rattling of death's breath. You look around. There's a collapsed tower to the left, broken into half its height. Within it once stood ceremonial drums, lined with stretched hides, beaten during feasts and rituals. Today, all that remains are rings of rusted metal and a few cracked sticks. A single drum remains upright, split down the middle like a fruit left too long in the sun. You approach it, run your hand along the rim. It's carved with scenes of dancers, some in mid-step, others crouched, hands covering their faces. Not everything ancient needed to be subtle. Historians still argue whether mass deaths among performers were due to overwork, poor nutrition, or disease. But one thing is clear. Something about this profession made them uniquely vulnerable. Perhaps because they worked in the temples, bathed in open pools, and performed barefoot at dusk, when the mosquitoes fed. You move to a corner where a statue lies flat, its head snapped off and missing. Based on the posture, she was dancing, 1 foot raised, arms in motion, torso bent. It's eerily lifelike despite the damage. Her fingers still curl in graceful defiance. According to temple records, when the fevers became unbearable, dancers were among the first to receive herbal treatment. Citron balm, smoked betel leaf, even dried scorpion paste, yes, scorpion, crushed and mixed with coconut oil. It was smeared along joints, forearms, the back of the neck. None of it worked for long. There's a story told in fragments across multiple villages. That one dancer, named Pri Esre Lun, which translates loosely to Moon of Grace, became famous not just for her beauty but her immunity. While others fell, she remained healthy, strong, untouched. She credited her resilience to a ritual. Every night, she would bathe in lotus water and sleep beside a burning bowl of lemongrass, her feet pointing east. Always east. She lived to be nearly 50, unheard of for a performer in that era. But after she died, her followers tried to replicate her ritual. None of them survived. You sit at the temple's edge, letting your feet dangle over the drop. The sun hangs low now, staining the trees with molten light. A breeze stirs your hair, and for a moment, the buzz fades. Maybe it's the altitude. Or maybe the insects are just watching. You look down and imagine the crowd gathered here 1,000 years ago, nobles in embroidered silk, priests with shaved heads, children clutching honey cakes. They're watching the dancers, smiling, applauding. And then one of the girls falters. Her arms drift out of rhythm, her head wobbles. She stares forward, eyes unfocused. The music keeps going, but she isn't following. She scratches her shoulder, then her neck. She starts to tremble, and then she drops. The drums stop. One noble coughs. Another sways. Someone whispers, "The gods are displeased." But it's not wrath. It's not divine. It's biology. You look again at the broken drum. That crack running through it, it's oddly deliberate, like a scar or a warning. Some fringe scholars suggest that the temples once hosted ceremonies to appease the mosquitoes. Tiny offerings of blood, chicken, usually, left in bowls at night. Candles lit in black clay holders, placed in circles around performance platforms. Not as sacrifice, as negotiation. The empire had gods, but it also had insects. And sometimes, you had to honor both. You rise, stretch your legs, and descend the crumbling steps with care. As you do, the air thickens again, and the sound returns, soft at first, then layered, textured. Not just buzzing, but the memory of motion. The breath of the dancers. The scrape of silk across stone. The muffled fall of bare feet. You walk away from the temple, down the path into shadow, and the last thing you hear behind you is a sound that's almost musical. Almost. The jungle path narrows again, sloping down into a ravine where the trees lean too close, and the light barely filters through. Your footsteps grow softer on the mossy earth, and your breath feels louder than it should. Somewhere ahead, hidden among roots and ferns, is the chamber of a man whose words survived, even when his mind did not. The scribe who sweated ink. That's what the locals called him. A royal scribe during the late reign of the Angkorian kings, he lived in a small stone cell built into the side of a hill, part shelter, part sanctuary, part prison, depending on who you ask. He was responsible for transcribing royal decrees, temple donations, and records of rainfall and harvests. But something changed. You duck under a thick vine and come into view of the ruin. It's no grand hall, just a squat chamber with a carved lintel and one cracked pillar. The door is low. You stoop to enter. Inside, the air is cooler, stiller. There's a large flat table at the center of the room, his writing surface, surrounded by broken jars and hollowed-out palm ink pots. The remains of scrolls lie scattered, some chewed by insects, others blackened by time. But a few markings survive. And they're strange. You crouch at the table. Among the fading characters of Khmer script are long, swooping spirals. They aren't letters. They're not decorative. They look like movement, like someone trying to draw sound, or wings, over and over and over again. According to fragments recovered by temple archivists, the scribe, once praised for his clarity and style, began making odd notes between official entries. Personal thoughts, fractured ideas, fevered observations, things that weren't meant to be read aloud. One preserved excerpt reads, "The buzz comes early now, not outside but within the stone. The ink dances before I write it. I hear the whispers through the walls. The gods do not answer, but the insects, they do." He started to lose himself, slowly and then all at once. There's a little-known theory, whispered among scholars who enjoy digging through less-than-reputable sources, that this scribe may have been one of the first to document mosquito-borne illness from the inside. Not as a physician, not as a victim, but as someone caught between delirium and duty. His writings grow increasingly erratic. The king burns and still we write. The temples hum. The priests pretend not to scratch. Even the statues itch. Some of the scrolls are written entirely in ink smudges, as though he couldn't grip the brush properly. Others have repeated words for lines on end. Buzzing, 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 buzzing. One entry is just a spiral, drawn for 12 feet without stopping. You step away from the table and move toward a low shelf on the wall, where a broken clay cup sits next to what may have been a fire lamp. Scratched into the stone behind it is a short line. They write in me now. You let out a slow breath. Imagine being responsible for recording the life of a kingdom while your own mind unspools from the inside. Picture the pressure. To write, to preserve, to document, while a fever pounds behind your eyes and the walls seem to breathe. He had no antibiotics, no rest, just ink. And maybe, at some point, even the ink turned against him. One record says that his final decree, meant to be a royal edict on tax relief, was delivered to the palace as a scroll covered in symbols no one could decipher. Spirals, circles, dots. When the king saw it, he reportedly said only, "Even the scribes rot now." The man was removed from service. Whether he fled here by choice or was exiled is unclear. But this cell became his last archive. He wrote until the ink ran dry. You stand at the doorway now, looking out over the trees. The hum is gentle here, not loud, not close, but present. You remember the scribe not as a madman, but as a mirror. What happens to a civilization when its chroniclers collapse, when even its record keepers succumb to forces too small to see? A mosquito doesn't care for meaning. But maybe that's the point. The more you try to understand, the more you spiral. You step out of the chamber and close your eyes. It's quiet. Then, one lands on your knuckle. You let it stay, just for a second. It bites. You whisper, "Write this down," and flick it away. The path meanders now, bending through a corridor of dense vines and crooked trees. Sunlight splinters through the canopy in broken shafts, like shards of gold trying to pierce an ancient veil. You keep walking, one foot ahead of the other, lulled by the rhythm of insects and the soft sigh of distant leaves. Eventually, the jungle spits you out into a clearing, but not a natural one. You're standing before a half-submerged temple complex, its base sunken into marshy ground, its towers leaning like tired men at the end of a long day. A heavy scent hangs in the air, wet stone, mildew, and something faintly sweet. Welcome to the Temple of Sticky Gods. That's not its real name, of course. The original has long been lost, erased by time, forgotten by cartographers. But among locals, this place earned its nickname for a peculiar reason. Here, they say, the gods got stuck. Literally. You cross a crumbling bridge, more moss than stone now, and step into the temple's entryway. The floor squelches faintly beneath your boots. It's always damp here, always warm, always buzzing. And just inside, between crumbling door frames and collapsed beams, stand 3 statues. They're not as large or elaborate as the ones in Angkor Wat or Bayon, but they're striking in their stillness. Except they're slick. Their surfaces glisten with a permanent sheen, as if they're constantly sweating. Sticky to the touch. Visitors have described it as sap, resin, some kind of natural secretion from the stone itself. Geologists are baffled. Locals have a simpler explanation. The gods were trapped by the swamp. The myth goes like this. When the fevers came, people turned to this temple in desperation. They prayed. They sacrificed. They sang old songs with newer lyrics. And for a time, the gods listened. They granted small reprieves, healing a child, quieting a cough, lifting a fever. But as more people came, the gods grew overwhelmed. One night, during a moonless dusk thick with heat and insects, the priests attempted a great ritual meant to bind the illness and banish it. The gods appeared, descended into their statues, and never left. The swamp rose, the air thickened, the stone began to sweat. And the gods, they stuck, trapped in resinous silence, unable or unwilling to move again. You walk slowly past the sticky statues. Their faces are blurred, not by erosion, but by centuries of fingerprints, flower oil, and thick offerings smudged across lips and brows. They smell faintly of lotus and mildew. It's unnerving. One figure has a garland of dried jasmine hanging around its neck. Another has blackened coins glued to its base with hardened sap. The third, smaller squatter, has dozens of dead mosquitoes pressed to its surface, not by accident, arranged carefully like votive symbols. This is where things shift from reverence to something else. Some believe this temple wasn't just a sanctuary, but a site of retaliation, a place where villagers cursed the gods, offering mosquitoes instead of incense. "You let this happen," the inscription says in a scratched panel near the south wall. "So you must listen now." You sit beside the temple's edge where the stone meets marsh, watching the water slowly lap against the foundation. It bubbles occasionally. No fish, no frogs, just bubbles, as if something breathes beneath. There's a fringe belief, mentioned only in oral accounts and scribbled field notes, that this temple wasn't built here accidentally, that it was constructed on top of an earlier site, perhaps a natural spring, perhaps something more ancient. A place of power, yes, but also of danger. An ancient Khmer legend tells of the pool that would not sleep, a body of water that boiled at night, not with heat, but with insects. When people drew from it, they dreamed of wings. When they bathed in it, their fevers returned stronger. So they built over it, contained it, prayed it shut. But the buzzing never stopped. You rise and move to the rear of the temple, where a shallow staircase descends into shadow. There's a room below, half-flooded, its walls slimy with algae, its corners filled with half-submerged offerings. Candles, coins, bits of cloth. And in the center, a stone basin filled with murky water. You step closer, careful not to slip. It's warm, still. The water has that faint sweetness again, like rotting fruit. Something clings to the surface, thin, stringy, dead larvae. No, hair, human. Black strands swirling lazily like they're waiting for something. You step back. This may have once been a healing pool, ritual immersion, purification, but now it feels like a place where sickness settles to rest, or wait, or plan. The locals still avoid this temple, not out of fear, but fatigue. Like it's a chapter they've read too many times, and they don't want to live through the ending again. Before you leave, you notice one final inscription. It's almost invisible, etched into the lintel above the entryway. Stone does not sweat for stone, only for what it carries. You run your fingers over the letters. They're damp. And for just a moment, you think you feel a pulse beneath the stone. But then it's gone. As you step out into the fading light, you realize you've stopped scratching. Not because the bites have vanished, but because they've become part of you, like the stories, like the gods. Stuck. The light shifts as you walk, subtly, strangely. Not like sunset, but as if someone turned down the contrast on the world. The colors go flat, the air thickens, and the jungle around you goes silent in that specific, suspicious way that makes you check behind you twice. You pass through a series of gnarled trees with bark like burned rope and arrive at what seems to be a village. Or rather, what used to be one. Stone foundations lie half-swallowed by vines and termite mounds. What were once homes are now mossy outlines, patches of brick like broken teeth in the soil. This is the village that vanished. Ask any old local and they'll say the same thing. It was here, and then it was. No fire, no flood, no invaders. It just faded. You walk carefully between the ghostly outlines of buildings. Here, a cooking pit. There, a worn path still visible between what may have been two homes. You find the remains of a well half filled with leaves and frogs, the rope long since gone. There's a single statue still standing, about shoulder height, carved from pink sandstone, worn to smoothness by rain and time. It depicts a woman with outstretched arms, eyes closed, mouth open as if mid-song. Locals say she was a guardian spirit, a house deity meant to bless crops and chase off illness. But clearly, she had her limits. The legend of the vanished village isn't a single story. It's dozens. Fragments. Confessions. One version says the people all went to sleep one night and never woke up. Another claims they walked into the jungle, single file, following the sound of humming no one else could hear. But one tale stands out. A man named Dara, a woodcutter, lived on the village's edge. He was the only one who didn't get sick, not once. While others scratched and shivered, Dara stayed strong. He credited this to his habit of chewing on the bark of a specific tree, the crabau tree, believed to repel evil spirits and, more practically, mosquitoes. When the fevers came harder than ever, when people started collapsing mid-conversation, when children stopped playing, when even the elders stopped pretending, it was Dara they turned to. He told them to move, to leave, that the village was sinking under the wings. They laughed, then begged him to stay. He packed his things and left at dawn. By nightfall, the village was gone. No screams, no firelight, just gone. Dara returned years later, older, weaker. He found the same stone foundations, the same goddess statue, the same eerie silence. But the jungle had taken everything else. He scratched at his arms the whole time he walked. And he died 2 days later. Fever. Historians, of course, don't include this tale in textbooks. It's folklore, superstition, a metaphor for migration, maybe, or plague, or collapse. But as you move deeper into the ruins, you start to feel it too, that subtle pressure in your ears, like the moment before a thunderstorm. The air feels occupied. You find a set of carved markers near what was probably a communal space, flat stones, half buried in soil. They're marked with a symbol that's appeared a few times in your journey, a circle surrounded by curved slashes like petals or wings. Was this a mosquito sigil, a fever ward, a warning? It could have been anything, but its repetition is impossible to ignore. You sit on the edge of a half-buried platform and try to imagine life here. People cooking rice, weaving baskets, trading fish and lemongrass and gossip. Children chasing frogs, dogs barking at shadows. Then the bites, the welts, the slow turning of warmth into weakness. And the sound, always the sound. There's a joke buried in the myth. How do you lose a village? Answer, one bite at a time. You lean back and look at the sky. It's darkening again, not from dusk, but from clouds, low, strange, the kind that carry humidity like grief. The buzz picks up. A few mosquitoes land on your leg. You let them. You're not in the mood to swat. Some say the villagers never died at all, that they still walk these paths in the hottest parts of the day, invisible to anyone not burning with fever. That if you lie down on the earth and listen hard enough, you can hear their feet rustling the leaves. You try it. Lie down, still your breath. Let the earth speak. And for a moment, just a second, it does. The wind shifts, leaves rustle, something moves through the grass. Footsteps, maybe. Or wings. You sit up quickly, the buzz fades. Everything returns to normal, or close enough. As you dust yourself off and step back onto the path, you look over your shoulder one last time. The village doesn't vanish before your eyes. It just keeps fading, slowly, patiently, like it always has. And the goddess statue, still smiling. still stuck in song. The path from the vanished village leads upward again, curling like a ribbon tossed carelessly across the spine of a hill. You climb slowly. The air changes, not cooler, not drier, just heavier. It settles in your throat like old smoke. The buzzing is distant for once, replaced by the occasional sharp cry of a bird you'll never see. At the top of the ridge is a structure unlike any you've seen so far. Not a temple, not a shrine. A bell tower. Half collapsed and leaning slightly to the left, the tower rises from a flat stone platform like a spine jutting from the earth. Ivy wraps around its base. Its upper section, where a great bronze bell once hung, is open to the sky. You can just make out the top through gaps in the vine-covered masonry. The bell is still there, but barely. Locals call it the temple bell that screamed. You approach cautiously. Something about it feels wrong in a familiar way. Not terrifying, just off, like a dream you can't remember but still mistrust. At the tower's base, the entryway yawns wide, its threshold cracked. Inside, you find stone stairs spiraling upward, tight, narrow, slick with damp moss. You climb carefully, one hand on the wall. As you ascend, something curious happens. The air gets colder, not by much, just a degree or two, enough to raise goosebumps. And then the sound begins. Not the bell, not yet, but the whisper. At first you think it's the wind through the stone, then a trick of your ears. But it doesn't fade. It coils. It wraps. It hums just low enough to dodge the part of your mind that wants to define it. It's not speech, not singing, but it feels like a voice. You reach the top. The bell looms above you, suspended by what must be the last surviving support beam. The bronze is green with patina, cracked along one edge. Beneath it is a wide hole in the floor, straight through to the earth below. If the bell ever fell, it would have sunk into the jungle like a stone through water. You step to the edge of the platform, look out. The view is enormous. Fields, rivers, scattered temple peaks lost in the forest canopy. You feel, for a moment, like a guardian watching over what remains of the empire. And then the whisper rises again. But now it's a buzz. Not loud, not close, but it's in the bell. The old story says this tower was built during a time of great fear. Not war, not drought, but something more insidious. The people said the mosquitoes had become messengers, that they carried not just illness but voices, orders, commands. The priests believed the air was infected, not just with disease, but with sound. That the buzzing of a million wings was slowly unraveling the sanity of the city. So they built this tower, and inside it they hung a bell. Not to call worshippers, but to drive the sound away. Every morning and evening the bell was rung. Once, then twice, then in short bursts, no rhythm, just repetition. It echoed across the fields, over the temples, down into the moats and reservoirs. And people swore it worked. For a while. Then the screams started. The bell, they said, began to change. It didn't just ring, it screamed. Its tone cracked, its echo warped, and on certain nights it sounded less like a bell and more like a chorus of insects in pain. One woman, a weaver who lived closest to the tower, claimed that she no longer heard the bell at all, but instead heard whispers under her skin every time it rang. Then the priest stopped ringing it, but it still rang, on its own. One night during a fever outbreak, a novice monk climbed the tower and struck the bell with a sacred hammer, hoping to break the curse. When he struck it, the tone bent violently, high and thin and sharp. Those nearby covered their ears. One man began vomiting blood. Several birds dropped dead in mid-flight. And the mosquitoes came in a wave. The novice was never found. You move slowly around the bell, careful not to touch it. A ring of ash surrounds its base, modern probably. A gesture by recent visitors to keep the past quiet. There's an inscription chiseled into the inner wall of the bell tower, low, right where someone kneeling might see it. You crouch and read. Sound carries, so do wings. Be careful what you ring. You sit near the edge of the tower and watch the shadows stretch long across the horizon. The light plays tricks up here. What you thought was a ridge becomes a moat. What you assumed were trees turn out to be towers. And the lines between memory and history blur. You think about the priests, the dancers, the kings, and the scribe. All of them tried to name the sickness, to explain the bite, to fight the hum. But maybe the empire didn't need a cure. Maybe it needed an apology. To the land, to the gods, to the insects. You close your eyes, the wind picks up, the vines shift. Then, just faintly, the bell moves. Not much, just a groan, metal scraping softly against wood. You don't wait. You descend quickly, the steps slick beneath your feet. Each one echoes like a drumbeat. You reach the bottom and step into the clearing, breathing hard. The bell doesn't ring again, but the buzzing follows. And as you walk away, you realize the screaming bell wasn't cursed. It was a warning, not of invasion or divine wrath, but of the hum that never ends, of sound that carries further than voices, of illness with wings. You look back once, the tower stands still, but the air still hums. You descend the hill under a sky the color of tarnished brass, where light flickers between the trees like the last seconds before a dream fades. There's a stillness now, an eerie, anticipatory kind. The kind that arrives before something you can't stop. You follow a shallow stream, its banks soft with mud and trampled offerings. Thin strips of bark float beside broken clay bowls and flower stems long since dried. This is where they held the lantern festivals. Not the joyous kind you're imagining. No children running with glowing paper balloons. No songs about harvests or love. No, these were lanterns of desperation. The ritual was born of fear and repurposed faith. When the fevers wouldn't stop and the buzzing grew too loud, the people tried something new. You reach the banks of a wide pond, a still mirror under a gray sky. In the center is a small floating shrine, barely more than a square raft of lashed bamboo and scorched incense sticks. Wax stains the edges. Feathers cling to the corners. Something burned here recently. The story goes that once a year, always on the most humid night of the monsoon season, the people of Angkor would gather at ponds and rivers carrying lanterns made from hollowed palm husks. They would place into each one a candle, a scrap of clothing from a sick loved one, and if they could spare it, a drop of blood. The lanterns were then lit and set afloat across the water, meant not to honor the gods, but to lure the insects away. The candles flickered and bobbed like stars fallen too low. And for a time, it seemed to work. People claimed they felt lighter afterward, cooler, that the fever floated out of their veins and onto the water. The sick would sleep better, the buzz would ease. But not always. Sometimes, the lanterns stopped moving. Sometimes, they turned back. One legend tells of a year when no lanterns reached the far side of the pond. They circled, fizzled out, sank. The priests called it a bad omen. The mosquitoes that year were worse than ever. Several priests died. A third of the temple dancers collapsed. Even the animals grew sick. Some said the lanterns weren't failing. They were refusing to carry the burden any longer. You kneel by the water's edge, watching a few burnt husks drift in lazy spirals. You can almost see them how they once were, glowing softly, casting gold lines across the dark water. A carved plaque lies face down in the shallows. You fish it out. The engraving is faint but intact. Light will guide what blood cannot. Poetic or desperate. You sit for a while and imagine the ritual. The crowds gathered in solemn silence, each person clutching a lantern like it held their last breath. a quiet chant passing through the rows, the flames blinking into life, the soft splash as they're released. Historians have uncovered fragments of this ceremony in temple records, though always under vague names: night fire for illness, floating breath, cleansing lights. Some chalk it up to a Buddhist adaptation of earlier animist traditions. Others think it was a community's last attempt to find meaning in a battle it never understood. And then there's the fringe theory. Some believe the Lantern Festival wasn't spiritual at all, but scientific. A primitive attempt at vector diversion. That the light and heat of the lanterns were meant to draw mosquitoes away from the living. That blood was used because it worked. Not as metaphor, as bait. You run your hand through the water. It's warm, thicker than it should be. You pull it back and notice tiny flecks clinging to your skin, ash pollen wings. A breeze stirs the surface, and the husks drift again, slow as sleep. Nearby, a stone bench lies cracked in half, its inscription long gone. But in the dirt beside, it is a circle of dark wax, hardened into a crescent shape. A candle base, maybe from last year, or the year before, or a century ago. You glance upward. A dragonfly dances low over the pond, its wings catching the light. It hovers, then lands on one of the burnt husks, rests, waits. And suddenly, you remember another part of the tale. They say that sometimes, if a lantern floats long enough, it becomes a carrier not just of illness, but of memory. That the water remembers. That if you stare too long, you might see faces in the flame, hear whispers in the ripples. You blink. The husk is just a husk. The water is still. The dragonfly lifts and vanishes into the trees. You stand slowly, your knees stiff. You've been here longer than you realized. Behind you, the forest hums again. You turn, and the path is darker than before. But ahead of you, one last husk still floats, unburnt, untouched, drifting slowly toward the middle. Its candle flares once, then goes out. The trees thicken again, bending in strange directions as if they've been leaning toward something just beyond reach. You follow a trail of scattered stones, some no bigger than your hand, others the size of dinner tables, all arranged like vertebrae from some ancient beast. The path leads to a clearing surrounded by overgrown hedges and crumbling wall fragments. At the center stands a rectangular platform, waist-high and carved from dark sandstone. A single stone sarcophagus lies upon it, closed, sealed, undisturbed. This is the tomb of the prince, with no pulse. The story begins, as so many do, with a fever. A quiet, insidious kind that didn't take the boy's life, but did something stranger. He was 17, healthy, strong, quick with a sword and quicker with a smile, they said. The second son of a noble family close to the court, destined not to rule but to support, to lead in war, to inspire. And then one day, he stopped moving. He'd complained of a headache, then chills, then silence. By sundown, he was lying in bed, his skin damp but cool, his eyes half-lidded, his lips just slightly blue. Physicians came, they checked his pulse. Nothing. They tried heat, incense, leeches, oils. Still nothing. But he didn't rot. That's where the mystery begins. He didn't die, not exactly. His chest rose barely. His fingers twitched. Once his eye flicked open and stared at the ceiling for hours. But he didn't speak, didn't eat, didn't move. Not for days, not for weeks. They called it the stillness. You run your fingers along the edge of the stone coffin. The carvings are unlike others you've seen. Not of gods or battles, but of spirals, dozens, hundreds, circling endlessly inward like a maze meant to trap something forever. They eventually placed the prince here, not with ceremony, but with quiet dread. Not buried, not cremated, just sealed in stone with a single bowl of water at his feet and 3 lit candles around his head. The candles burned out after a day. The water was gone by morning. And yet, there were rumors. A guard swore he heard humming from the tomb 3 nights after sealing it. Another said he saw condensation on the stone, like breath against glass. One servant even claimed the prince spoke in his sleep, one word repeated twice. Still, historians have dismissed the tale as exaggeration, an early report of catatonia, perhaps, or a misdiagnosed coma brought on by a severe bout of dengue or cerebral malaria. Conditions that today might be managed, but in the 13th century were mysterious, terrifying, and very often lethal. But the legends, they say otherwise. They say the prince wasn't afflicted. He was visited. That mosquitoes didn't bite him. They entered him, swarmed through his ears and nose and eyes, and settled somewhere beneath his skin, humming their secrets until his own blood remembered how to sing. That's why his body didn't decay, why his breath was shallow but present, why even now some believe he still dreams inside the tomb. You crouch beside the platform, noticing something etched into the base. A small panel with one repeated phrase carved over and over in uneven lines. I am not gone, I am not gone, I am not gone. Maybe it was the prince. Maybe it was someone watching over him. There's a modern superstition among guides in the region. If you visit the tomb, you must speak aloud before leaving. Say your name, your birthday, and a small secret. Not to honor the prince, to remind him that you are not him. Because those who don't sometimes wake up cold, unable to move, their skin pale, their pulse shallow, just for a day, just enough to scare themselves into memory. You stand and glance at the treetops. The buzz is distant but ever present, like a thought you can't quite shake. The wind picks up slightly. The leaves don't move. Some say the prince was cursed, others blessed. One fringe theory claims his condition was a test by the gods to see if stillness could become strength, that his breath slowed not from weakness, but from waiting. That one day he'll wake, unharmed by centuries, and rise with a swarm in his mouth and lightning in his eyes. You sincerely hope not. As you prepare to leave, you notice something on the far side of the tomb. A small, flat bowl, modern, clay but recent, still intact. Inside it, a handful of dried herbs, citron, ginger, lotus petal. Someone still visits. You walk slowly back toward the edge of the clearing, casting one last look over your shoulder. The stone is silent, the spirals unmoving. The buzz, for now, has softened. You say your name, your birthday, a secret you won't admit to anyone else. And then you walk on. Just in case. Forest opens into a sun-dappled glade, and for a moment, it almost feels cheerful. If you ignore the incessant itch behind your right ear and the new welt blooming along your forearm. You try not to scratch. You fail. Ahead, the roots of a strangler fig wrap around an exposed stone wall like fingers gripping a secret. You follow them, weaving between toppled carvings and broken steps, until you arrive at an inner corridor of what was once a proud temple gallery. It's silent here, too silent. You glance up and see faded reliefs carved into the lintels above, lines of script worn smooth by centuries of fingers and rain. And on every wall, rows upon rows of engraved figures. Kings, courtiers, dancers, soldiers, all smiling. And all scratching. You blink. It's subtle, easy to miss. Most raise one arm toward their face, their back, their neck. Some clench their hands in awkward, unnatural poses. You thought it was just stylization, but it repeats across dozens of panels. This is what scholars call the itch in the inscriptions. You walk slowly down the corridor, tracing the stone with your fingertips. The figures grow more chaotic the deeper in you go. The lines between people blur. Some have wings. Some are etched with odd bumps or halo-like rings around their arms. And in one, a royal figure, possibly a priest, holds a stylus in one hand and furiously claws at his chest with the other. This wasn't just art. This was a symptom. There's a controversial theory, long dismissed as pseudohistory, that these reliefs represent a cultural outbreak, not of disease, but of itching. A sort of social hysteria driven by infection, humidity, and psychological contagion. The people scratched because others scratched, because everyone was being bitten, because the buzz wouldn't stop. One 14th century tablet, translated roughly from fragmentary text, reads, "The gods do not take us by sword or flood. They take us by inch. They take us by itch." You duck under a collapsed beam and enter a secondary chamber. This room is narrower, more cramped. The carvings here are deeper, more urgent, cut with less care. Perhaps by those with shaking hands, perhaps those in pain. A repeating image dominates the walls here. A spiral carved into arms, thighs, faces. Sometimes it's concentric, other times erratic with jagged spokes. You've seen this motif before in the scribe's madness, the prince's tomb, the leech healer's basin. But here, it isn't hidden. It's everywhere, as if the spiral itself had infected the stone. You move to the back wall where a central figure, nearly life-sized, stands carved into the niche. Not a god, not a king, just a man naked but for a cloth with hundreds of tiny lines etched across his skin. No weapon, no expression. His hands are pressed to his temples. His mouth is open in a silent scream. At his feet, a pile of what appears to be insects, and around them, scratch marks, not carved. Actual scratches in the stone, as if later visitors clawed at the surface, desperate to erase or understand. You reach out and touch one of the lines. It's shallow, but sharp. The room begins to feel warmer. You remember that one Chinese visitor to Angkor wrote of walls that speak with fingers and described seeing temples with carvings, so precise in posture and pain that he dreamed of them for days. Some called him overly poetic, others infected. There's a modern rumor, mostly among tour guides and jungle hunters, that scratching certain parts of these carvings brings relief, not to the skin, but to the soul. That somehow the stone absorbs the irritation, carries it, silences it. You try it. One tap on the chest of the carved man. One rub of your palm across the spiral on the wall. It doesn't help, but it doesn't hurt either. You exit the corridor and find a broken plinth just outside. Someone else left a leaf bundle there, fresh, tied with string. You lift it gently. Inside, ashes, fragments of burned cloth, and a folded piece of paper with a single word scratched into it over and over. Stop. You place it back. The deeper you go into these ruins, the more it becomes clear that scratching wasn't a symptom. It was a statement, a defiance, or perhaps a surrender. Because you can't fight what you can't see, but you can mark it. You can scratch it out of memory, onto walls, into stone. Maybe that's why so many Khmer temples are covered in images of motion. Dance, procession, ritual. Maybe it wasn't about honor. Maybe it was about trying to move faster than the bite. But the insects, they always catch up. The corridor behind you grows darker, more claustrophobic. You step into sunlight again, blinking. The reliefs don't follow, but the itch does. You glance at your arm. Another bite, maybe two. You don't bother swatting. You just sigh. Because sometimes, history doesn't kill you with swords or floods or fire. Sometimes, it just makes you scratch. You walk through a narrow stretch of forest where the ground begins to slope downward, gently at first, then with increasing steepness. You follow the incline, boots crunching on gravel and twisted roots. The air smells different here, earthy, pungent, laced with the scent of wet coconuts. You're not imagining it. There's a pile of them ahead. Half-rotted husks are scattered across a stream bed like oversized brown skulls, their shells cracked open to reveal mold-blackened interiors. You approach slowly, carefully. A few have markings, sloppy red paint, perhaps, or blood. This is the site of one of Angkor's strangest omens. The floating coconut. You stop at the edge of the water and glance down. It's more of a stream now than a canal. But centuries ago, it was part of a major waterway. A carefully constructed route designed to feed rice paddies and support boat traffic between temples. And one year, so the legend goes, a single coconut floated upstream. Not during a flood, not during wind, just calmly, casually, against the current. This alone might not have raised concern. Strange things happen in rivers, but the coconut didn't stop. It moved upstream for nearly 3 miles, all the way to the basin of Pre-Con. Witnesses watched it pass. Some followed it. Others turned away. It was recorded as a sign. The coconut, they said, was a harbinger, a message from the water spirits, a warning of something unnatural. That year, the mosquitoes came early, aggressive, organized, even. Entire neighborhoods of the outer city fell ill within weeks. Workers at temple construction sites refused to leave their huts. Dancers forgot their choreography. Priests stopped chanting mid-ritual. And worse, the water turned strange. Not dirty, not red, but thick, sticky, as if the canals were weeping. One high priest interpreted the coconut's journey as symbolic, an indication that the balance of nature had reversed, that what once fed the land now devoured it. That flow had become rot. Historians are divided on whether this was a poetic metaphor or a literal event. But remarkably, the coconut does appear in an inscription at Ta Som Temple. The tablet reads, "The fruit rose without hands. The blood came without wound." You sit on a nearby boulder, brushing your fingers along a green shoot growing through a discarded husk. The stream murmurs. A dragonfly skims the surface. And yet, you feel watched. There's another version of the story, one they don't write down. It says the coconut wasn't empty. That when it was finally opened at Pre-Con, it was full of larvae, wriggling, translucent, thrumming in unison. They say the priest who cracked it open dropped dead the next morning. Fever, rash, eyes rolled back, mouth open as if still muttering a prayer. The villagers began throwing coconuts into the water as offerings after that, dozens at a time. Some filled with citron oil, some wrapped in cloth, some hollowed out and packed with garlic and crushed turmeric. Anything to please or confuse the spirits. It didn't help. You wade into the shallow water. It rises over your ankles, warm and sluggish. Something brushes against your shin. A twig, hopefully. You pick up one of the intact coconuts. It's waterlogged, heavy, its eyes dark and soft. You shake it gently. Something sloshes inside. You set it back down, trying not to think about what. There's a faded sign carved into a flat rock nearby, almost fully obscured by lichen. You clean it with the edge of your boot. Beneath the green fuzz, the words appear simpler than usual. Don't follow the fruit. Maybe advice, maybe regret. You wonder if this entire empire ever understood what was happening to it. Whether anyone realized that every beautiful canal, every symmetrical reservoir, every spiritual pond had slowly become a birthplace for sickness. The engineers of Angkor had designed one of the most sophisticated hydrological systems the world had ever seen. But they hadn't designed for stillness, for what happens when water stops listening. That's the irony of the coconut. It didn't defy nature. It simply mirrored it. The empire flowed outward, then began to curl back. And in that curl came the buzz, the bites, the hum. Some claim that if you wait here long enough, another coconut will float by. And if it floats against the current, you should leave immediately. Walk fast. Don't look back. You look downstream. Nothing. The water burbles softly. You look upstream. And there, caught in a bend between two stones. Something bobs. Round, brown, slowly turning in place. You don't wait to see where it goes. You step back onto the path, scratch your wrist, and keep walking. Because you've heard this story before, and you already know how it ends. The trail grows softer beneath your feet, the earth loose and fine like sifted ash. Bamboo thickets rise and fall around you, sighing in the warm breeze. Somewhere behind their stalks, birds mutter and wings flicker, but you don't stop. You're walking towards silence. And then, nestled in a fold of trees, you find her. A mausoleum, modest by Angkorian standards. Just one domed chamber of black stone, smoothed by time, and a cracked lintel bearing only 2 words in ancient Khmer. And she sleeps. This is the resting place of the queen who slept forever. The story is half lullaby, half cautionary tale. They say she was the youngest wife of a powerful king. Beloved, beautiful, brilliant. She studied stars, wrote poems, and more unusually, insisted on sleeping outside the palace walls in a private garden pavilion. She said the palace air made her sick. But one evening, as the stories go, she was bitten by a mosquito just below the eye. A tiny prick, harmless. By morning, she wouldn't wake. The physicians found no rash, no fever, no stiffness of limbs. Her body was cool, not cold. Breathless but peaceful, they waited. They whispered prayers. They burned incense, rang bells, poured oils. Nothing worked. She was declared dead, but no one dared to cremate her. Why? Because her body never changed. Not after a week, not after a month, no bloating, no rot. Her skin remained smooth, her hair still fragrant with jasmine oil. And her eyes, though closed, twitched. So they sealed her here, in a chamber made from stone brought in from a quarry far to the east. A stone believed to trap restless spirits. A stone so dense it muted sound. Some say she's still dreaming. You circle the mausoleum. There are no other structures nearby. No guardian statues. Just a ring of flattened grass, broken now and then by burnt sticks, offerings perhaps, or markers. There's a tiny window carved into the stone, only a few inches wide. You peek through. Inside is darkness, cool, still unbroken, but you swear just barely you hear something. Not movement, not breath, just humming. You pull back. The tale of the sleeping queen grew over the years. Some claimed she was cursed. Others said she had ascended, left her body behind like a shell. But the strangest theory, that the mosquito didn't infect her. It chose her. That it whispered something in her blood, that she wasn't asleep, she was listening. Listening to every buzz, every wing beat, every pulse, until her mind merged with the swarm. One monk, exiled from Angkor for theories unbecoming of the order, believed the queen became the first human mosquito mind. That through stillness, she reached the collective hum beneath the surface of the world. You think about that as you sit at the mausoleum's base, scratching idly at your elbow. It's not the most absurd idea you've heard. After all, Angkor was built on connection. Stone to spirit, temple to temple, water to rice, king to god. Why not mind to insect? There's a strange comfort in the notion that she didn't die, just changed, adapted, escaped the fever not by fighting it, but by folding into it. You lean against the warm stone. It vibrates faintly, no more than a heartbeat. Could be heat, could be memory. You glance at the surrounding trees. No movement, no buzz. But the silence here doesn't feel empty. It feels full. You remember the nursery rhyme adapted from her story, sung in backwaters long after the empire fell. Close your eyes and hold your breath. The queen lies low in dreaming death. One bite took her from the light. Now she hums with wings at night. You hum it now quietly, just the rhythm, no melody. The wind picks up and carries the tune into the trees. Somewhere behind you, a twig snaps, or maybe it doesn't. You rise and place your palm on the stone one last time. Still smooth, still cool, still here. And inside, a woman who may never wake, or already has. You leave the mausoleum in silence, your steps slower now, less from fatigue than from caution. The jungle is different here, closer. The trees tilt inward like suspicious onlookers, and the path, if it even is one, wavers like memory. After a few minutes of wandering, you find yourself at the edge of something strange. A canal. But not just any canal, the canal that bled backward. It's narrow, maybe 10 feet wide, flanked by stone embankments etched with faded lotus motifs and serpent spines. The water within is still, greenish, but as you watch, a ripple moves upstream. Yes, upstream. Not fast, not violent, just wrong. This canal, according to legend, was part of a late-stage Angkorian attempt to revive their failing irrigation system. The empire's once perfect water network was faltering, barrays silting up, channels clogged with mud and vegetation. Engineers, now more desperate than divine, began rebuilding. And somewhere along the line, this canal was dug. It was meant to connect a minor reservoir to a village pond. Simple, efficient, functional. But from the moment it was completed, the water refused to behave. It didn't flow toward the pond, it trickled backward, upstream, against gravity, against logic. Some said it was an illusion, others sabotage. But then people got sick. Again. The village nearby, already weakened by years of crop loss and stagnant water, saw a spike in fevers within weeks. The mosquitoes swarmed heavier than ever. And the canal, it didn't stop bleeding. Because that's what the villagers started calling it, the canal that bled. Not because of actual blood, but because of its color. The water took on a faint rust-red hue, algae perhaps, or minerals, or something else. There's a line from a temple scribe around this time that reads, "The land bleeds, where water forgets its direction." You walk along the edge of the canal, noting how the banks are uneven, sloped oddly, as if the builders fought against something invisible during construction. Small statues have fallen into the water, a lion head, a naga tail, both submerged now, only their eyes visible above the surface, watching. You crouch and touch the water. It's warm, slightly oily. You pull your hand back and see a smear of red clay along your palm. Not blood, but suggestive. One theory among modern researchers is that the backflow was caused by a subtle shift in land elevation, a natural fault line, or subsidence from centuries of rice farming. Others claim the canal tapped into an underground spring with unpredictable pressure. But local lore tells a different tale. They say the canal was cursed from the beginning, that the earth here had been wounded during a war long before Angkor rose, that when the engineers dug into it, they reopened a scar. And from that scar, the sickness poured. A traveling monk, who visited shortly before the village's final abandonment, wrote, "Even the frogs refused the water. The air was soft, but it whispered lies, and the insects sang louder than the drums." He died 3 days later. You reach the midpoint of the canal, where a small stone pavilion juts out from the bank, a rest station, maybe, for travelers or workers. The roof is gone. Inside, there's just a bench half covered in vines. On the back wall, scratched not carved, someone has etched 3 words. "It's flowing home." That phrase has haunted archaeologists for years. Home, to what? To where? Was the canal simply malfunctioning infrastructure? Or was it, as some believers suggest, alive, following instinct, flowing toward something older than the empire, older than gods, older than language? You sit on the bench and stare at the water. Still, it moves upstream. Still, it refuses to listen. Some fringe scholars, often laughed out of conferences, insist that this canal is the key to understanding the Khmer collapse, that it wasn't war or drought or disease, that it was a loss of alignment between the built world and the natural one, that the land itself began to reject control. And with it came the insects. Because, they say, mosquitoes aren't just opportunists. They're signals, indicators, warnings that equilibrium is breaking down, that something isn't working anymore. And when the canals started flowing backward, the message was clear. The system had turned on itself. You rise, brush dirt from your hands, and follow the canal a few steps more. Just ahead, the water disappears underground into a covered tunnel, collapsed in places, dark as a wound. You don't follow it. Not because you're scared. Because you understand. Water that bleeds backward is not for chasing. It's for remembering. You leave the strange canal behind and climb a gentle slope through a section of forest that feels older than everything you've walked through. The trees are thicker here, broader at the base, with roots like stone serpents and bark scarred with ancient gouges. The light filters through sluggishly, painting the trail in dull gold and green. You've entered what the locals call the monsoon trap. At first glance, it's just another pocket of forest. But during the rainy season, this area transforms into a maze of sudden ponds, rising creeks, and invisible channels. Trails vanish overnight. Footpaths fill with water. Small hills become islands. And in this tangled geography of wet and wild, the mosquitoes rule. You reach a bend where a sunken footbridge juts from the mud, partially submerged and covered in moss. Someone has laid a plank over part of it, a recent addition, warped by the weather, slippery from rot. You cross carefully, knowing one wrong step could mean a bootful of swamp. This area was once a military outpost. Not a fortress, nothing grand or ceremonial, just a relay site, a midway point between the capital and the outer provinces. Supplies were passed here, soldiers rested, messengers changed horses. And then, one monsoon season, the ground shifted. The rains came harder than anyone remembered. The forest swelled. The rivers defied their banks, and the mosquitoes arrived in clouds. Reports from that time are sparse, but one record survives: an officer's log carved into palm bark and preserved inside a temple wall. It reads, "The water rose faster than we could flee. It trapped our horses, spoiled our rice, and bred wings into our lungs." That line, "bred wings into our lungs," appears nowhere else in Khmer texts. It's unique, haunting, and perhaps not poetic. Some scholars believe the monsoon that year flooded latrines and open burial sites, creating a toxic brew of water, waste, and rot. Disease spread not just through mosquitoes, but through contact, through breath. And the soldiers trapped in this basin didn't just get sick. They turned. Not into monsters, of course. This isn't a ghost story. But into ghosts of themselves. They stopped eating, stopped writing, sat beneath makeshift tents, scratching themselves raw, mumbling about the beat beneath the rain. One reportedly tried to dig his way out of the forest, straight down. He didn't get far. You find one of their watchtowers now, just a squat rise of stone surrounded by lichen-covered posts. A few rusted metal fragments remain, spearheads, a broken blade, something that may have once been armor. At the base of the tower is a stone basin, empty. It wasn't for water. It was for smoke. When the monsoon made movement impossible and the buzz of insects grew unbearable, the soldiers burned green wood and herbs in these basins. The smoke was thick, noxious, designed not to purify but to suffocate the swarms. They'd sit in the smoke, eyes watering, lungs burning, and hope it kept the fever at bay. One survivor described the experience as drowning in hot fog while the sky tried to chew through my skin. There's a dark joke buried in the ruins here, literally. At the center of the site is a carving on the floor of what used to be the officers' quarters. It shows a fish with wings, its tail curling into a spiral. Some say it was a local artist's attempt to mock the situation. Others say it was a warning. The lines between air and water had blurred, between insect and man, between environment and enemy. You crouch by the image and feel the stone beneath your palm. Warm, damp, alive in that way old ruins often are. The forest murmurs around you, and from somewhere in the trees, the buzz returns. Not thick, but high, like a violin string being plucked by something with too many hands. It's said that when the water finally receded, there was nothing left but equipment. No bodies, no bones, just rusted weapons and clawed-up bedding. And the buzzing. Always the buzzing. The Empire's armies didn't fall in one glorious battle. They were worn down, eaten at the edges, not by invaders, but by nature. And in places like this, traps laid by monsoon and hubris, resistance was pointless. You stand and look around. The forest reclaims everything here. Walls buckle under root systems. Pillars lean like drunk monks. Nothing in this place looks like it ever belonged to people. Except the scratches on the tower walls. Dozens, hundreds, deep, random, not inscriptions. Just desperate marks made by soldiers who couldn't run, couldn't fight. Just sat and itched. You leave slowly, the waterlogged path squelching underfoot. Behind you, the monsoon trap closes in, silent and still, waiting for the next rain. The path is barely a path now. More instinct than trail, more memory than route. Ferns close behind you as you push through, each footstep swallowed by the soft, pulpy earth. The light grows thin again. Above, the canopy knits tighter. The trees here are tall and thin, like spears aimed at a sky long gone. And then you hear it. Dripping. Not rain, not a stream. Just one, steady, drip. You follow the sound until the underbrush gives way to stone, flat, ancient flagstones covered in wet moss. Before you lies a shallow cavern, its mouth yawning low in the hillside like a half-buried secret. Roots hang from the ceiling. Water glistens along the walls. This is the cave of the sleepless nights. It's not a temple, not a burial chamber. No one really knows what it was. Maybe a meditation retreat, maybe a guard post. But the story says it was a place people came to after they gave up on everything else. When the fevers wouldn't break. When the buzz grew louder than prayer. When the itches bled. You duck inside. The ceiling is low enough to force you into a crouch. The temperature drops. The dripping continues. Inside, the darkness is wet and deep and old. The floor is damp stone, slick with film. And there in the center is a circle. Not painted, not carved. Scratched. A spiral again, the same maddening symbol. At the edges of the room, dozens of smaller spirals mark the walls, some precise, others frantic, etched with fingernails or blades. You walk around slowly, your breath loud in the hush. The air here feels used, like it's been exhaled 1,000 times and never replaced. According to the legend, those who couldn't sleep would come here, not to find rest, to abandon the need for it. They'd scratch, murmur, sit for hours, staring at nothing, slapping at arms already raw. Some claimed they saw wings in the shadows, small ones, fast, always just out of reach. Others didn't see anything, they just felt it. The locals say the cave hums at night. Not every night, just the hot ones, the heavy ones, when the air is thick and the moon hangs too low. And if you sleep here, which they don't recommend, you'll wake with your mouth open. Not gasping, not screaming, just wide, as if waiting for something to fly in. You sit on a stone at the cave's edge and close your eyes. The drip continues. And underneath it, faint but undeniable, The buzz. You open your eyes. There's no swarm, just the sound. You press a hand to your arm. Another bite, of course, or was it already there? Somewhere deeper in the cave, a wall bears a carved message, not in Khmer, but a simpler scrawl. Maybe later, maybe left by someone like you. The skin remembers. You run your hand along the edge of the spiral in the center. It's not deep, but it's worn smooth from repetition. How many fingers traced this line? How many sleepless people dragged their pain into stone, trying to empty it? One researcher who spent a night here described vivid hallucinations. Wings emerging from his fingertips, the floor breathing. Whispers of names he'd never heard before. He left the cave and never returned to Cambodia. But before he left, he wrote one sentence in his journal. It isn't the bites, it's what they carry with them. He wasn't talking about blood. He meant memory, instinct, something viral not just in the body, but in the soul. Because if mosquitoes can carry disease, what else could they carry? You stand and step back out into the light. The forest feels different now, more like breath than landscape. You look over your shoulder once. The cave watches. You scratch your elbow. The welt is raised, hot, familiar. You don't look at it. You walk away slowly, not because you're afraid, but because you don't want to hear that drip one more time. The story says the cave was sealed once, centuries ago. A stone rolled across the mouth, prayers etched into it, sealed with wax and sap. It didn't last. Because some places don't want to be forgotten. And some memories crawl. The trees open slowly as you climb a narrow rise, where the roots grow thinner and the canopy loosens its grip on the sky. The sunlight feels too bright at first. Your eyes squint against it. But then you realize it's not sunlight at all. It's reflection. You've arrived at Mirror Pool, a nearly perfect oval of water perched on the ridge, its surface so still it looks like a hole punched through the world. No ripples, no insects, no birds. Just silence and sky. It's breathtaking, beautiful even. But wrong. Because nothing that still is ever truly safe. The Mirror Pool appears in a dozen contradictory accounts. Some call it a sacred basin for final rites, others a royal bath used by the Queen's court. But most agree on one thing: no one drank from it. Even at the height of drought, when the berets dried and the ponds shrank to mud, Mirror Pool remained untouched. Why? Because it showed too much. One ancient inscription, found on a pillar now toppled nearby, reads, "Here the sky reveals what the flesh cannot." You walk to the edge and look down. You see yourself, of course, but not as you are. You look tired, gaunt, older than you should, your eyes rimmed with shadow. A single mosquito hovers above your reflection, not above you, just the image. Then it lands, right on your mirrored cheek. You blink, it's gone. This is the legend. Mirror Pool doesn't just reflect your face, it reflects what's inside. Your sickness, your hunger, your grief. One story claims a monk came here after 40 days of meditation. He looked down and saw not himself, but a woman he'd wronged years before, her face twisted, smiling. He ran screaming into the forest. They never found him. You kneel by the water, peer deeper. You see shapes, trees, sky, and behind your reflection, tiny flickers of movement, not fish, not plants. Wings. Beneath the surface, dozens of shapes dart back and forth. Too small to identify, too fast to track, but they're there. The locals say these are the echo-born spirits of those who never found peace in sleep, cursed to swim forever just below memory. Drawn to those who carry too much fever, too much guilt. You touch the surface with a fingertip. It's cold. The reflection shatters into 1,000 tiny waves, all pushing outward in slow, perfect rings. For a heartbeat, everything stops. Then the sound comes back. Not a buzz. A hum. Low, deep, harmonic. It doesn't come from the air. It comes from the water. You step back. One theory, only mentioned in obscure field journals, suggests that the pool has a magnetic anomaly, disrupting local insect behavior. That's why the mosquitoes don't land here. That's why birds avoid it. But some say it's simpler. The pool is full. Not of water, not of memories. Of names. Each mosquito that bites you takes something. A word, a feeling, a sliver of thought. And when it dies, that cargo, still alive, seeks water. Here, the pool is where the bites collect. You stand in silence, the air warm again. The hum is gone, the ripples fade. You consider tossing something in your notebook, a coin, a strand of hair. You don't. Because the rule is simple. What goes in reflects, and sometimes reflection means return. Before you leave, you walk the perimeter. Halfway around, you find a stone plaque embedded in the earth, half covered in moss. The words are still legible. Take only your shadow, leave only your fever. You look one last time into the water. Your reflection is back. You smile. It doesn't. The wind shifts as you descend the ridge, carrying with it a new scent, faint, metallic, almost like rust. The trees thin out again, but this time it's not natural. They've been cleared. Strategically. What remains is a field, flat, dry, and dotted with stone posts arranged in crooked rows. You've arrived at the Whisper Orchard. But there are no trees. Not anymore. This used to be a sacred grove, planted with sugar palms and beetle trees in long, ceremonial lines. Each tree was dedicated to someone, a priest, a dancer, a soldier who died during the wet season. The orchard was a living archive of memory. And then it went quiet. The name Whisper Orchard comes from a series of strange reports spanning generations. Villagers who passed nearby at dusk claimed to hear voices, whispers, rising from the trees. Not angry, not pleading, just present, murmuring names, events, regrets. Some even claimed the trees repeated phrases from their own thoughts. Naturally, the trees were cut down. Not all at once, quietly, over decades. The land was never replanted, the whispers stopped. Or, at least, they stopped for the people who didn't come too close. You step between the old boundary markers, the stones carved not with names but with spirals again. Always the spiral. Some large, others no bigger than your thumb. A few are fresh. Someone's still carving. You kneel beside one and brush away the leaves. There's another mark, a small insect carved into the base. It's not stylized, it's specific. A mosquito mid-flight, wings outstretched. Beneath it, in tiny script, return here only with silence. You obey. There's a strange pressure here, not noise, but the absence of it. Even the buzz has faded. You scratch your knee absent-mindedly. It's not new, just persistent. A souvenir you'll carry for days. The legend of the orchard gets stranger. One tale says that the trees didn't whisper because of spirits, but because they remembered. That the sap stored the sounds of those who touched them. That when the wind moved just right, those sounds escaped again. It's a nice thought. Until you remember that trees are often tapped for their fluids. And blood is a fluid. Some theorists suggest the orchard was a massive ritual experiment, planted, watered, and tended with offerings of blood and fevered cloth. The idea was simple. Transfer illness from body to bark. Let the trees absorb it. Let the leaves carry it away. But if that's true, the system eventually failed. Maybe the trees took too much. Or maybe they started giving it back. One particularly obscure inscription, found at a nearby temple, now collapsed, claims that when the trees begin to hum, the ground will rise. That phrase has no clear interpretation. Some say it references earthquake or rebellion or just metaphorical collapse. But in Whisper Orchard, the ground does feel different. Soft, not like dirt, like padding. You press your boot down. It sinks just a little too far. You crouch, dig with your fingers. Just under the top layer of soil, something smooth. A tile. You scrape it clean. It's part of a mosaic. A face, eyes closed, carved into glazed stone, cool to the touch even in the heat. Not part of a floor, not buried by mistake. Placed. You dig a little more. Another tile, another face, dozens of them arranged beneath the earth. It's not an orchard, it's a roof. You're walking on the ceiling of something much older. A silence well. That's the name whispered by a few fringe historians. A massive subterranean vault designed not to hold people, but sound. They say that at the end of the fever years, when Angkor was on its last breath, a secret chamber was built. Every whispered confession, every death rattle, every fevered prayer was spoken into it, sealed beneath tiles and roots. And the trees above. They fed on it. You sit back, suddenly aware of how quiet it's become. No wind, no birds. You scratch again. The welt on your arm is larger now. Your fingers move without thinking. One last story. A dying priest walked into this orchard alone. He sat beneath a tree, placed a stone on his tongue, and whispered his own name 3 times. Then he lay down, closed his eyes, and never moved again. When they found him, he was covered in mosquitoes, but not a single bite. It's said that the orchard knew him. You stand, brushing soil from your hands. This place doesn't want to be solved. It wants to be heard. You walk slowly back to the path, leaving the orchard to its silence. And behind you, the wind picks up, just slightly. And for a moment, you swear you hear your name. The path forks unexpectedly, one trail descending into shadow, the other climbing toward a dry ridge where the trees grow sparse and sunlight strikes the stone. You follow the high road this time. The air is still, save for the sound of your feet scraping over loose gravel and the distant, ever-present hum threading through the leaves. It takes a few minutes, but at the top, the forest opens again. And you find it. A courtyard made of red stone, clean, even, as if swept daily. No vines, no moss, no signs of decay. Just orderly square tiles and a stone pedestal at the center. On the pedestal, a chair. This is the seat of the last smile. You walk toward it slowly, your body quiet but your thoughts suddenly loud. The chair is carved from a single slab of sandstone, polished to a smooth sheen. Its back curves gently. Its seat is slightly indented. No decorations, no script, just function, just stillness. It was said to be a meditation seat, used by a sage known only as Sodap, a man who once served as a spiritual advisor to the king, but vanished from the palace without explanation. No exile, no scandal, just one day gone. He built this place himself, or so the story goes. No roof, no walls, no statues to guard or impress, just a chair and the quiet. People say Sodap came here because of the hum. Not to escape it, but to understand it. He believed the mosquitoes weren't pests. They were messengers. That their song carried something ancient, older than words, deeper than language. He spent his final years seated on this very stone, letting them land, letting them bite. He never swatted. He never scratched. And eventually, he never moved. One monk claimed to have found him here years later, still sitting, still smiling, eyes open but unfocused. A living statue, unmoved by rain or time. He died that night. Or maybe years before. No one knows for sure. You circle the chair. Its surface is warm from the sun. You see tiny pockmarks on the stone, weather maybe, or the cumulative trace of 100,000 bites. There's an odd sense of peace here. Which is the strangest part. This is where it all should feel wrong. A place dedicated to stillness while the empire collapsed. A man who surrendered his flesh to insects and called it clarity. But it doesn't feel dark. It feels quiet. One fringe belief about Sodop claims that he was the first person to hear the original hum, the note carried in the wings of the first mosquito. That hum, they say, was not a warning. It was a lullaby. And in listening to it fully, Sodop stepped outside time. There's a soft breeze now, and with it, a faint buzzing, not chaotic, not frantic, rhythmic, like a chant, like breath. You sit down on the stone chair. The surface is hard but not uncomfortable. You rest your hands on your knees. You wait. A mosquito lands on your wrist. You let it. You breathe. Another lands, then a third. Still, you do nothing. The air grows thick. The light warps a little. Time stretches in the way it does when you're not quite awake, not quite dreaming. And just for a moment, you understand Sodop. Not because you hear voices, not because your skin forgets to itch, but because you stop needing to ask why. The buzz is not a scream, it's a presence. And the bite. It's a reminder. You open your eyes, the courtyard hasn't changed, but the sun is lower, the shadows longer. You stand and walk around the seat once more. Someone has scratched a single word into the base, faint but legible. Finally, whether it was Sodop who carved it or someone else who came after, you don't know. But it fits. Before you leave, you place your hand on the back of the chair. Thank you, you whisper. You don't wait for an answer. Because some truths don't arrive with thunder. They arrive on wings. The descent from Sodop's seat is quiet. The forest parts without effort, as if you've been granted passage by something older than permission. Your steps are lighter now, not because the burden has lifted, but because you've grown used to its weight. And then you see it. A wall. Not a ruin, not a temple facade. Just a straight, low barrier of blackened stones stretching across the forest floor. It disappears into the trees on either side, a line that suggests a perimeter, or maybe a boundary. This is the wall of unasked questions. You approach slowly. The stones are smooth and warm. No carvings, no paint, just stacked blocks, each the length of your arm, fitted tightly without mortar. They rise to just below your waist, as if inviting you to sit. Or lean in. Or listen. This wall, according to scattered accounts, was built late in Angkor's decline. Not by royal decree, not by temple architects, by villagers. People who had no other way to respond to what was happening. The story goes that as the illnesses grew worse, as the insects grew bolder, the people began asking questions, dangerous ones. Why does the water no longer flow? Why do the gods stay silent? Why can no one stop the bite? And most damning, why are we still building temples if we're all too sick to enter them? So they built a wall, not to block, but to hold. Each stone, they said, represented a question no one dared to speak aloud. People came at night and placed their stones in silence. Some brought small ones for the quiet doubts. Others brought heavy, jagged blocks that required two people to carry. No names, no rituals. Just unspoken weight. You walk the length of it. It curves slightly, disappears into a thicket, then reemerges on the far side, always continuing, never quite ending. You stop at a section where one stone is chipped open, exposing a hollow core. Inside is a bundle of dried herbs and a piece of cloth. A fever rag. Still stained. The wall isn't long enough to be defense. It isn't high enough to hide behind. It's not functional in any practical sense, but it feels like it's holding something. Memory, maybe, or silence, or breath. There's a phrase scratched faintly into a nearby tree. We ask the questions with our hands. Some modern researchers interpret the wall as metaphor, collective grief materialized. Others dismiss it entirely, calling it a simple boundary marker or agricultural line. But they can't explain the offering pits found at its base, or the incense burns, or the fact that people still leave tokens here: bracelets, folded leaves, rice tied in knots of string. You find one now, a strip of bark with tiny pinprick holes in it, forming the shape of a mosquito if you squint. You place it back. One strange feature of the wall: in several places, stones have been turned sideways to reveal inscriptions on their underside. Most are gibberish, spirals, scratches, but one stands out. It's a short phrase, etched delicately, centered within the stone's surface. Some answers are smaller than questions. You sit on the wall and breathe in. The buzz returns, not oppressive, not biting, just ambient. Familiar. It threads through the air like an old tune. Maybe the wall was never about fear. Maybe it was about containment. Not of sickness, but of thought. You imagine a woman kneeling here, placing her stone in the night, pressing her fingers to it like a prayer. Not speaking, not crying, just releasing. And walking away lighter. The mosquitoes land on your arm again. This time you don't swat, you don't scratch. You just listen. To the sound of your own blood humming. To the quiet weight of unspoken things. To the wall. It doesn't speak. It doesn't move. But somehow it answers you. And that's enough. The final bend in the forest trail leads you to a flat expanse, unusual for this terrain. No steps, no slopes, just a broad, sun-bleached plain ringed with the ruins of 4 small towers. Each one stands at a corner, forming a broken square. You're standing in what used to be a field of blessings. And now, it's just called the Quiet Burn. It was once a healing site, believed to be one of the last public sanctuaries built before the Khmer Empire's decline was too obvious to ignore. It wasn't dedicated to gods, but to balance. Priests from rival sects would gather here and perform synchronized rituals using wind, fire, water, and stone. The 4 towers represented these elements, and in the center, people would lie down, sick, weak, delirious, and be treated not with potions or chants, but with the forces themselves. Wind was fanned over the body with palm leaves soaked in oil. Fire was kindled in slow-burning censers beside the feet. Water was sprinkled across the chest in concentric rings. Stone, always cold, was placed on the forehead. Some patients walked away healed, others were carried, but none left untouched. You move toward the center. A circle of worn stone tiles marks the ritual space. The colors are long faded, but faint outlines remain: arrows, curves, the suggestion of movement. A ritual dance, a map, a wound. There's a single altar stone still intact. On it, scorch marks, dried wax, fragments of copper bowls. Someone has burned offerings here, recently. And beside it, something stranger. A pile of ash, perfectly circular, no wider than your hand. You crouch and examine it. Inside the ash, scattered like forgotten seeds, mosquito wings. Dozens. Not the bodies, just the wings. A quiet burn. Some modern entomologists speculate that smoke, if blended correctly with certain herbs, lemongrass, clove, dried lotus, can disorient mosquito swarms. That's true even today. But the locals believed this place didn't repel mosquitoes. It absorbed them. One legend claims the site was constructed atop a convergence of ley lines, natural channels of earth energy. When the elements were aligned and the patient truly surrendered, the hum of the insects could be drawn out, not just from the body, but from the air. There's a fringe term for it: fever displacement. Not curing the illness, redirecting it, letting the hum settle somewhere else. You run your hand over the altar stone. It's warm from the sun, but cold underneath. You feel a pulse, not yours, not the stone's, something between the two. A final ceremony was performed here in the last years of the empire. Eyewitness accounts are sparse, but one monk described it like this. We placed her on the stone, the air was thick. The insects fled. The fire burned sideways. She did not scream. When it was done, the buzzing in our heads was gone. We slept for the first time in 4 years. The girl unnamed in the records was believed to be a carrier, not of disease, but of the hum itself. Her presence brought illness. Her dreams summoned mosquitoes. When she cried, the air shimmered. They did not ask her permission. Afterward, the temple was abandoned. You stand in the center now. The towers are mostly hollowed out. Birds perch where bells once rang. Trees have yet to reclaim the field, perhaps out of caution. You close your eyes and hear nothing. No buzz, no wind, no birds. Just quiet. A true quiet, the kind you almost never hear. This, perhaps, was the real blessing. Not healing, not escape, but pause. You stay for a while, maybe 10 minutes, maybe an hour. Time stretches here. Then, from the edge of the field, the breeze returns. With it, the buzz. Not many, just 1 or 2, but enough to remind you nothing ever disappears. It only waits. You walk to the northern tower. Inside, scratched into the wall in long, looping lines, is a phrase repeated 10 times. They do not forgive, but they forget. And below it, in a different hand. Until the next bite. You smile, not out of joy, but recognition. You step back into the sun. The ash at the center still smolders slightly, just a wisp. The last quiet burns fast. You follow the final path now, narrow, sunken, shaded by low canopies that drip with quiet. The trail leads downhill, slowly spiraling, like it's circling something buried beneath your feet. You pass no carvings, no ruins, no whispers of kings or queens. Just dirt, stone, breath. And eventually, you reach the basin. A wide depression in the land, filled not with water, but with grass that sways as if stirred by invisible tides. In the center, a solitary stone pillar. This is the still point. There are no stories carved here, no offerings, no marks of gods. But everyone who visits Angkor's lost places eventually hears about the still point. They say this is where the buzz finally goes silent. You walk slowly into the basin. Your boots brush the high grass, which parts easily, respectfully. The air is warm but not thick. The light is soft. The mosquitoes. Gone. Not a single one. The stone pillar stands about shoulder height, pale gray, unadorned. Except when you get closer, you see that it's not unmarked. It's covered in bites. Hundreds of tiny dimples pock the surface, so shallow, so uniform that they almost look intentional. A pattern, a texture, or maybe an offering. This is where, according to the oldest legends, the fever ended. Not cured, not erased. Just stopped. For one man or woman, no one is sure. The still point marked the end of the hum. They came here and lay beside the pillar, arms open, breath slow. And when they awoke, the mosquitoes had vanished. Not dead, not swatted, just absent. Their skin cool, their mind clear. Their dreams empty. The tale is always told with a shrug. No details, no explanation. Just the image of a figure resting by the pillar while the forest leaned in close, curious and confused. Historians dismiss it as a metaphor, of course. A story of inner peace told through the language of fever and flight. A symbolic anchor to mark the place where fear fades. But even skeptics admit, the still point has a strange silence to it. Birds don't sing here. Insects don't buzz. Even the trees sway without sound. You place your hand on the pillar. It's not warm, it's not cold, it's simply there. And the moment your palm rests on the surface, you feel it. Nothing. No itch, no pulse spike, no static in your ears, no phantom wings. Just a stillness so deep, so total that it feels like the bottom of a well. Not hollow, just waiting. You sit beside the pillar, cross-legged, breathing evenly. And it hits you, something small but unmistakable. You are not alone. Not in the physical sense. There's no one nearby, but the feeling grows. That others have sat here, stood here, breathed in this exact air, felt the weight of the story settle in quiet. Maybe this is what the Empire never understood. That not every problem is solved by building higher, carving deeper, chanting louder. Sometimes you just have to stop. And listen. And wait. You remain there for a while. The minutes pass, the day softens, the shadows stretch. Then from somewhere beyond the trees, far, faint, but familiar, you hear it. And the spell breaks. You smile. Because of course it returns. That's the nature of it. You rise, stretch, and glance once more at the pillar. The marks are still there, yours included now, in ways that don't need skin. You step away from the still point and begin the journey back, not to escape, not to end, but to carry. Because that's what we do with stories that buzz. We carry them, one bite at a time. And now, as we drift away from the last stones of the Khmer Empire, let the journey slow. The trees grow soft again, their leaves no longer watching. The forest exhales. The air is still, not heavy, not hot, just still. You feel your feet sink slightly into the earth with each step, the ground welcoming you, the trail now familiar. The buzzing fades, not gone, but quieter, like a whisper that no longer needs to be understood. Let your breath deepen. Let the memory of stone and spiral in silence dissolve into the soft dark behind your eyes. Remember the leech healer, the prince with no pulse, the woman who slept forever. Not as legends, not as mysteries, but as echoes. Small shapes in the great hum of time. Let your body grow heavier. Let your arms loosen. Let your jaw unclench, your fingers rest, your mind no longer scratching. The story's told, the walk is done. There is nothing left for you to solve, no more names to speak, no more whispers to hear. Only quiet now. Let it wrap around you like moss on stone, like old shadow, like night that knows how to wait. And if you dream, may it be still. And if you stir, may it be slow. And if the hum returns, may it pass gently, like a breeze that forgets your name. Sleep now. You're safe. You're home.